Raising Cane's is celebrating 25 years. That means 25 years of serving over 2.5 billion cook-to-order chicken finger meals. And 25 years of saying drive-thru rhymes. Lots and lots of times. Oh, and 25 years of the same mascot. Okay, different mascots with the same name. And 25 years of serving our communities. Thanks for making us your chicken fix since way back in '96. Raising Cane's, 25 years, one love.
For joining us tonight. We really do appreciate that. And let's see here. Who else do we have here? Alan Hold, nice to see you. And here is our panel, everyone. I tell you, this is a who's who panel here of everybody here. Wheelahan. I got it. For our panel, I will remind you, if you don't mind, A, no swearing, B, no, I was going to say no politics. How can we talk about Paul Hellyer without talking politics? But if you could, when you're done speaking, just put your microphone on mute. I've got you all on mute right now. And we're going to get going here momentarily here. Pam McSee looking lovely tonight. Hi, Sandra. Apollo 11, good to see you, my friend. We appreciate you coming on in. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to get going here in about 29 seconds. So sit back, relax. It's a complete tribute show with an incredible panel of people that are second to none when it comes to knowledge of the late, great Paul Hellyer, who passed away yesterday at the age of 98. And I hate doing shows like this. I really do. But it's one way where we can say a big thank you to the great work that a person like Mr. Hellyer did to bring UFOs to the governmental forefront. Richard Elmore, good to see you. Hi, Little Deborah. Here we go. From the mountains of central British Columbia to you listening around the world, this, my friends, is Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott, sitting in the captain's chair of SOR headquarters. We welcome you to tonight's show on our terrestrial affiliates around North America and digitally on TalkStream Live, Revolution Radio, and KPNL. All of our archives are free by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do old Davey the favor, hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Tonight's show is brought to you by Chive Charities. Help make the world 10% happier by visiting Chive Charities today. You can find them on our website. Legendary Canadian politician and advocate for UFO disclosure, Paul Hellyer, has passed away. He was 98 years old. Hellyer was first elected into the Canadian government in 1949. He spent a few years in the 1960s as Canada's Minister of Defence. However, later in life, he was the highest-ranking politician to come out and state emphatically that UFOs were real and that Earth has been visited by an extraterrestrial presence. He has also stated that government officials both in Canada and the United States and around the world have been in contact with alien species. It was a topic he never let go. Tonight, we pay tribute to the Right Honourable Hellyer with an impeccable panel of friends and colleagues. We have Grant Cameron. We have Stephen Bassett, one of his best friends and colleagues, Victor Vigiani. Sinead Wheelahan is here as well. She had known Paul, and Dr. Bob McGuire as well. And Victor, I want to start with you on this one, if you don't mind, if you just turn your mic on there, because this really hit home for you today. You've had a very emotional day in learning about the passing of your friend, Paul Hellyer.
Indeed, it was, David, a very difficult day. This morning I got up and just, as we all probably normally do, you check your email, and I'd been in contact with one of Paul's family members. I believe it's his niece, and she'd been giving us regular updates following the June 15th incident that Paul had he had a serious fall, and he had hit his head badly. And unlikely enough, he was in the garage of his condominium, and he fell and hit his head seriously, and suffered severe bleeding to the brain, and it caught us all off guard. Very difficult to understand, and Juan was good enough to keep us updated on all of the ups and downs, and things looked very, very serious to begin with, and he was in the hospital for well over 3 weeks, and following that, they brought him home and had a hospital bed in his condominium here in Toronto, and he was receiving intensive care with the 24/7 home care nurse, and just trying to keep him stabilized, which proved to be very difficult. He was having trouble swallowing. He wasn't very lucid at many points during the day. But after about a week and a half or so, he began to kind of become a little bit more lucid. He understood what was going on around him, and eventually was able to sit in a wheelchair and go outside and enjoy the sunshine. He lived right on the shore of Lake Ontario in his condominium, so things were looking pretty good there for a while. But then he had a downturn within the last several days, and this morning we all got word that he had passed away at 6:31 p.m. on Sunday night here in Toronto.
For you, how long does this relationship go back for you, Victor?
It all started in the year 2005. If you want me to describe the entire scenario, it is a bit of an interesting story, and Steve will probably want to chirp in at some point later on about that. In 2005, a colleague of mine, Mike Bird, and I were planning the Symposium on Disclosure here in Toronto, the University of Toronto. And we were in the midst of all the planning, and lots was going on in terms of getting speakers. And we had Steve Bassett as a speaker, Paula Harris, who, oddly enough, could not attend because of health reasons. And Richard Dolan was there, and Stanton Friedman was at the symposium with us at the University of Toronto. But before that, the way things turned out is, I don't know if all of you are young enough or old enough, depending on where you are situated in the timeline. I did a radio program with Errol Bruce Knapp called Strange Days Indeed on CFRB radio here in Toronto. At the time, CFRB was the #1 radio station across Canada as a talk radio show. And Errol Bruce Knapp did a program, as I said, called Strange Days Indeed on Saturday nights from 11 o'clock to 1. And Errol and I, on one evening, I believe it was in May, I don't have the specific date, but we just finished a show. I forget who we were interviewing, but what happened would be Errol and I would do the interviews for 2 hours in the studio, and then after that we'd go over to the local pub and have a few ales around 1 o'clock at night. But just as we were leaving the studio, the operator behind the glass said, "Victor, there's a call for you on line 2." And both Errol and I were pretty well wiped out after 2 hours of straight radio, which is, you can understand that. But I decided to take the call, and it was a fellow named Jim. I won't use his last name, but it was, he said, "Hi, my name is Jim." I said, "Oh, hello, Jim." And he said, "You have to talk to Paul Hellyer." And at the time, 2005, the only thing that I could reference in terms of Paul Hellyer was that he was a Minister of Defense at the time. I had no idea what he was up to at the time, nothing at all to do with UFOs. But this fellow, Jim, said, I was the former campaign manager for Paul Hellyer when he was elected in 1949. I said, that's a pretty good, close relationship. So he said, "Yes, you have to talk to Paul." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, he's beginning to understand what this whole UFO issue is all about, and you need to talk to him." So that conversation lasted for a few minutes, and I said to Jim, I said, "Well, you know what, I'll give Paul a call. That's fine." I said, "Well, why would you suggest it?" "Well, he's just finished reading The Day After Roswell by Philip J. Corso." I said, there's another tip-off for me. So I said to Jim, "Yep, I'll give him a call." And eventually, within about 4 or 5 days, I didn't know what to make of it at the time, I give Paul a call and said, "Mr. Hellyer, my name is Victor Bijani. Jim, your friend, said that I should call you. You are reading the book Day After Roswell." He said, yes, I am. And I said, have you finished reading the book yet? He said, well, not completely. I'm just about 3/4 of the way through. I said, well, listen, if you ever want to consider, coming forward about your belief in UFOs, because you're obviously becoming to a point where you're going to advocate for it, we were having a symposium next September 27th of 2005, and we'd like you to be the keynote speaker. And he said, oh, no, I could never do that. No, I don't want to go public on anything like that at all. I said, okay, well, take your time with it, read the book, and I'll call you back in about 4 or 5 days, which I did. He finished reading the book. I called him, and then we had a conversation probably towards the beginning of June, as I recall. And I said, well, what do you think about the book? And he said, I just can't believe it. And he said, well, what, I said to him, what's changing your mind about this whole issue? He said, well, I spoke to a general, a United States general, and in confidence, and he said that everything in the book, meaning The Day After Roswell, was true and even more. And so I said that, well, does this mean that you want to come to our symposium and be the keynote speaker? He said, yes, I will. And as soon as I got up off the floor and said to myself, my goodness, we've got something here, he conceded. And after that, he became part of the symposium. And the rest is just history. We introduced him before a crowd of almost 500 people at the University of Toronto Convocation Hall. And he spoke for about 35 or 40 minutes as the keynote speaker. Steve was there, as was Stanton Friedman and Richard Dolan. So that's kind of how it all happened in a very brief synopsis. There's much more to it before and after that, but that's the whole Reader's Digest version of how Paul and I got to become so involved in this issue.
Grant Cameron, I want to bring you on here momentarily as, being Canadian, and there are a lot of great Canadian UFO researchers out there, but Paul Hellyer was the biggest name next to Stanton Friedman that we had going forward regarding this, and I would put you in that category as well. I hope you don't mind, but it's my show and I'm allowed to. And anyways, for you, what did it mean to have somebody like Paul Hellyer speaking about UFOs?
Well, I don't know if that's the right question. Actually, I can tell you a couple of things people don't know. My father, one of the things you left out with his resume, he was actually deputy prime minister under Trudeau, which is basically like the vice president of the country. So he was deputy prime minister, and he was also, importantly, the minister of transport. He was minister of defense, but he was also minister of transport. And the Canadian official UFO flying saucer study was done under the Department of Transport. My father was a pilot for the Department of Transport, and he actually used to fly Hellyer around. And I don't think he got along with Hellyer, but so I go actually back to the 1970s with Paul Hellyer, and that has a couple of stories, because Bob McGuire was asking, and I'll sort of maybe elaborate later, but what Paul actually knew. And one of the things that he had done, he had given a very famous speech as defense minister in 1967 at St. Paul, Alberta, because that was the Canadian centennial, and everybody had their little project for their town or whatever. St. Paul, Alberta built a UFO landing base. And Paul Hellyer made a very famous speech there where he says, this is July the 1st on like the Canada's birthday. And he said, this isn't the first landing base we built in Canada. There was another one built in 1954. And that was the same year of the story of Eisenhower meeting with the aliens. 54, the Canadians opened up a base. And he said, the Canadians opened up a base and nothing landed there, therefore UFOs don't exist. So a researcher by the name of Arthur Bray and myself started to chase Hellyer back in the 1970s already. And basically what we were going after, because I'd gone to Wilbur Smith, who ran the Canadian Flying Saucer program, and I talked to his wife, Merle Smith. Wilbur's long dead. But I said to her, I showed her the article with Paul Hellyer making this speech and saying that they had opened up this UFO landing base. And I said to her, was Wilbur behind this? And she read it and she went, yeah, it was Wilbur. And she said that Prime Minister Saint Laurent in the early 1950s had made an agreement with Wilbur Smith to keep the Project Magnet report and all these reports under cover for now. And Wilbur said, if you want, if you quit trying to shoot these things down, I'll get it to land. And he was in contact with an alien by the name of Alpha. The Navy intelligence in the United States was in contact with this being. So was the CIA. And he said, I'll get it to land. And there was an agreement. There was an agreement with the Department of Defense, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and with the cabinet to allow this thing to land at Suffield, Alberta. So Suffield, Alberta is it's a top secret Army base, or it was. They did nerve gas testing and stuff. It was at a restricted fly zone. My father told me about all this. It was like the Area 51 of Canada. And that's where the thing was going to land. So when Hellyer made this speech in 1967, Arthur Bray and I started going after him and saying, how did you know? How do the aliens know where to land? Because that's what the story was missing. And it was the part that Wilbur had actually arranged for this thing to land. And they couldn't get 100% guarantee that they would allow it to take off. And Wilbur called the whole thing off. He said, okay, that's it. We're not going to land. Alpha's not coming in. We can't get the proper guarantee. And they called it off. So that was the whole thing. They opened up the base. And I remember Paul he was talking to both of us. And he was pretty open about it. And he said, I'm looking at my files. I've got to go to this underground place in Ottawa where they have all the files of his years in Parliament. And he said, I couldn't find it. I was looking. I was trying to find it. And then he said to me, the guy that was the expert in the Department of Defense in Canada was a guy from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, but I can't remember his name. And I still remember. So we chased him around, and this is how the story ended, where he said, I couldn't remember the guy's name. He's the guy that told me the story, because I kept saying, who told you the story about Suffield, Alberta? How do you know about this? And how did the aliens know where to land? Somebody had to have made agreement. And then I put it on my website. I said, oh, come on. How are you going to believe this? Paul Hellyer tells the story, and this guy's the expert on UFOs in the Department of Defense, and he can't remember who the guy is. This is garbage. And so then I still remember, and if you ever met Paul Hellyer, you know he's a very big guy. And he said to me, Mr. Cameron, I'd like to have breakfast with you. So I go, we were in Washington. So I said, oh, cool. This former defense minister, my father flew him around. And so I come down, he's got all these files under his arm. And he says to me, he sits down, he's got these files, and he says, Mr. Cameron, I may be many things, but one of them isn't a liar. And I go, I knew exactly what he was talking about this thing that he couldn't remember who this guy's name was. He said, and this is where he got into this thing that Bob was asking about. He said, I didn't know what was going on. He said, I was putting all the services together. So the Army, Navy, and the Air Force were all being amalgamated into one service. And he said, I was busy doing that. He said, there may have been UFO reports, some reports coming across my desk, but I didn't pay attention. I couldn't care less. And so he basically stated to me at that point that when he was the defense minister, he was basically out of the loop. He did not get interested until Paul Hellyer described where he got that book the day after Roswell. And then I think it was this, Victor can correct me where if I'm wrong, but I think his son-in-law came up to him and he said, what are you reading that junk for? I mean, that's garbage. I mean, that's all nonsense or whatever. And Paul said, it is. And that, I think, was the son that had contact with the two-star general. And then he put Paul in contact. And as soon as Paul heard this general say, it's all real and more, that's when he suddenly got into the UFO thing.
Wow.
But before then, he really didn't know that much what was going on. And but he did make this very famous speech in Canada in 1967 that described the fact that the Canadians had opened Suffield, Alberta, for an alien to land there in 1954.
All right, I want to bring in Sinead Wheelahan here, first time to Spaced Out Radio. Thank you so much, Sinead, for joining us here on this incredible panel. I mean, you and I come from pretty much the same generation where Paul Hellyer's name has always been bandied about. We know him more for his UFO works than we do his politics, shall we say. For you, what did Paul Hellyer mean to you as a Canadian and someone who is researching UFOs?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Dave. It really is an honor to be invited and to be among this company tonight. So thank you very much for having me. I was not a friend or colleague of Paul Hellyer's. I certainly cannot claim that, but I did have the fortunate ability to communicate with him for a short time at a very pivotal time in my life in terms of this community and this topic we're talking about right now. So I was able to communicate with him for a few months, 2-3 months over email. I also met with him twice, and his significant impact on me was kind of twofold. One is that I had my massive awakening. It really was massive, energetically massive, in July or late June, early July of 2019. And that's a whole other story. But the main thing is that once this happened, I needed to kind of process what to do and where to go, where my path was going to lead me into this community. I'd never been in the ufology community at all. The ufology, I just said ufology. The community of the paranormal experiencers, UFOs, ufology, exopolitics, any of it. It was not a part of my life whatsoever. But after I had my awakening, I needed to find some guidance. I didn't know anybody who's in the community. And so I started just researching like a madwoman. I was totally obsessed. And, I had this ginormous experience. And so Paul Hellyer was one of the first people I found. And I didn't know him. He didn't know me, certainly. But I wrote to him and I said, Mr. Hellyer, I really need some help and some guidance. And you seem to be somebody who really knows what's going on in this field. And so if you can give me some guidance about where to go or what to do with this information I received during my awakening, I really, really appreciate it because I don't know what to do. And he was absolutely lovely. And he wrote me back right away, pretty much, and said, of course, he was very supportive. He said, of course, I can help you. And here's what I would advise. So one of the things he told me to do was actually to go to my first ever ufology conference, which was happening in Toronto. There are not a lot of conferences that happen here. I live in Toronto. There are really not a lot on this topic that happened in this particular city. There are some. Victor knows about that. But this was certainly not something I had ever heard of before. And there was one that was happening just about a month and a half later in Toronto. So he said, you need to go to this conference. And I'm going to be there, and you and I can talk, which we did. I sent all of you in our group chat earlier today. I sent you a photograph of myself and Mr. Hellyer there at that conference. But if I hadn't gotten that guidance from him, and I reached out to a number of people, but he was the only one who told me to go to that conference, I never would have met Grant. And that meeting with Grant was absolutely not an accident. There's a whole story with that as well. And, led to this connection I have with Grant. And here I am now doing work with him and research with him and doing interviews on YouTube. Like, this is something I never thought I was going to be doing ever. But it is very much a part of what I'm.
Built upon a solid foundation of cast iron and steel, the Kubota L-Series tractor is the #1 selling compact tractor in the U.S. for over 10 years. Powerful Kubota diesel engine, ease of operation, and your choice of a Kubota gear or HST transmission. The durable Kubota L-Series. Talk to your local Kubota dealer today to schedule a demo. Go to KubotaUSA.com for full disclaimer.
Parish Tractor, Kubota Elite Dealer. On the web at parishtractor.com.
Hi, I'm Liz Munoz, CEO of Torrid, and at Torrid, we know how hard it is to find clothes that fit great and feel super comfortable, especially if you're a bigger or curvy girl. So when we couldn't find the perfect jean, we built the perfect jean. We call it the Bombshell, and it truly does it all. It lifts, it shapes, it smooths, but the first thing you'll notice when you put them on, most comfortable jeans ever. Honestly, they're magic. So come to Torrid.com and try your first pair of Bombshell jeans today.
Supposed to be doing in this lifetime, and I have Paul Hellyer to, as one of the people to thank for helping me get onto that path, but he was also just such an incredibly noble man. He really had a great deal of integrity, personal integrity, and believed so much in changing the way human beings operated. Edgar Mitchell said that his two priorities, that Mr. Hellyer's two priorities were exopolitics and sustainability, environmental sustainability in particular. And I very much relate to that. That's something that's a major priority for me as well. So there were things that Mr. Hellyer felt very strongly about. The banking system, which I believe he called infinitely silly, for example. He just recognized that there's systems that we use that are really not actually beneficial to us and are not helpful to us in our growth, as human beings on this planet, or helpful to the planet necessarily. So I just really admired him. I thought his courage was astounding, especially considering his background and his standing, so he impacted on me in a number of ways. Mm-hmm.
We've got about a minute 30 before we got to go to break at the bottom of the hour. When we come back, we're going to get to Stephen Bassett and Dr. Bob McGuire in regards to the passing of legendary UFO researcher and Canadian politician, Mr. Paul Hellyer. And I got to share with you guys something, because I'm sure you'll all get a laugh. It got back to Paul that I didn't believe his story, that he knew nothing when he was in office as the Minister of Defense. I mean, Stefan Michalek's Falcon Lake case happened on his watch. Shortly after the Liberals were defeated by the Conservatives in 1967, 3 weeks later, we have the Shag Harbor incident. And as Grant pointed out, we also had the landing pad for Canada's 100th birthday. And in this email, he ended it. This was on December 19th, 2019. And I'll read it verbatim here. He goes, "Good luck, best regards, and Merry Christmas to you, Paul. P.S. I don't have secrets, at least none that I talk about." And I was like, you shrewd old bastard. You know, I mean, there you are, you know, just pulling my chain, basically saying, you're not right, but you are right in certain cases. But I'm not going to tell you. And I just felt so warmed. I must have laughed for days about that because, I mean, this is a man who had many secrets. And unfortunately, many of those will go to the grave with him. I hate to put it that way, but that's what's happened. I do hope, and in my hope, and we'll talk about this as well, that one day that we have the ability to open up his files the way Grant, Sinead, Nicole, and Desta have been able to get into Stanton Friedman's files, because that would be immaculate to see the who's who and the names of names in those files. Grant Cameron, Sinead Wellihan, we have Stephen Bassett, Victor Vigiani, and Dr. Bob McGuire. We are paying tribute tonight to the late and great Paul Hellyer, who passed away at the age of 98 years old. UFO talk about the great Paul Hellyer coming up next. All right, guys, we are clear for 5 minutes. You know, put your mics on if you want. We're all just hanging out with the YouTube crowd, or nobody. Maybe I will. I'll unlock all of you.
Is there?
Sorry, Grant?
Is there any questions from the YouTube crowd?
Not yet. They're all just kind of peeling on in right now and getting comfortable.
Are we beating the Elizondo number, or how close are we?
We're about 255 away from the Elizondo number.
Oh, then we're not doing too good tonight.
Not yet. We will. I got to wait for the... normally I have to wait for Jimmy Church to be over, and then I get another 50 to 100.
There you go.
And he's got Dolan on tonight. We will be taking questions in hour 2 with the panel if we can get to them. And, yeah. Just quickly saying hello to everyone who's come on in.
Victor, I'd actually like to give you my condolences directly. I know you were very important to Paul, that he was to you. So, my sincere condolences.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a very difficult time over the past month and a half. Not easy to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul was in pretty good health till then. I mean, he was.
Yeah.
Oh yes, for sure.
He was walking around, and he was.
I spoke to him. Okay, I spoke to him at the end of May. We had a conversation, just sort of, hey, how you doing kind of thing. And we were just chatting. We really didn't talk about anything specific. But it was partly to do with, and let me know when you want to go off, Dave,
Yeah, keep going.
to do with his last book. And he planned a press release to announce the publishing of his new book. And I went through all kinds of hoops with a press release agency, Cision, actually, and we had a press release all ready to go, and it was all set. All I had to do was press the button, and the thing would be published. And it cost Paul a fair hunk. It would have cost Paul a fair hunk of money, but I called him and just said, "Okay, everything's ready to go." And he said, "Victor, we have to stop it." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I don't want to publish it." He said, "I've been in touch with the creator, and he told me not to do this."
Oh.
So
what does that mean?
What the hell does that mean is right. So I said, well, it seemed like he thought he'd be threatened by it. I'm not quite sure. He didn't explain himself. And Paul had a way of telling me to do things that he never really fully explained. So I said, well, I mean, it's all ready to go. You're sure you want to do this? It's publicizing and promoting your book. He said, no, we're not going to go ahead with it. Just stop. We're just not going to do it. And when Paul said something like that, I knew his level of determination. When Paul says something that he wants, what Paul wants, he gets. So that's exactly what I did. I stepped away from it, and we chatted on about other things. But that was the last time I spoke with him, specifically or physically. And then he had the fall in mid-June. So that was my last conversation with him.
I didn't even know that he fell.
Yeah.
It was a pretty bad fall, apparently. Not sure why. Well, he'd always had. He's a big guy. He was just, and as you get older, the way you make your way around in your own space is not easy. So I can well understand why, because there were certain stairs in the. I've been in the parking lot before. You have to go up a couple of flights of stairs to do things. So I can well understand how he might have misstepped some way and tripped and fallen, and hit his head. So it's quite understandable that it happened.
It's kind of painful personally, because my dad began to go downhill a bit. He was in his 70s, and he began to shuffle a bit, and he fell and hit his head on his concrete driveway, and he was dead 2 months later.
Oh, goodness.
There you go.
We got about 30 seconds, guys. Want to say a big thank you to Mark Rademacher for kicking off the Super Chat tonight. It's a great way to support what we do on this show on a nightly basis. Thank you to all the new people tuning on in. Maybe this is your first time listening in on this very special night where we honor Paul Hellyer. And thank you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring that bell so you know we are live here 7 days a week at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern. Here we go with the panel. I'll get you guys to mute up. Second half hour of Spaced Out Radio is now underway. My name is Dave Scott. We're going to get right to it tonight because we are paying tribute to the late Canadian politician and a very honorable man in the UFO field, Mr. Paul Hellyer, who passed away at the age of 98. And we're going to start things off right off the bat with Stephen Bassett, because Stephen, even though, this is a worldwide topic, and you really focus on what's happening in Washington, D.C., and with the Paradigm Research Group. I mean, Paul Hellyer was somebody who could really blend any type of thinking together in the UFO community. I would love for you to talk about your experiences with the Right Honorable Paul Hellyer.
Being in the United States, I did not have the kind of contact with him that Grant or Victor could have. But we corresponded occasionally. He was important for many reasons, but he's part of a long line of individuals of some stature, rank, station who have stepped into this issue, going all the way back to the 1940s. We know about astronauts and some other politicians. Admiral Lord Hill Norton, of course, made some pretty strong remarks. And these are important because, obviously, when someone that has a substantial resume is willing to speak directly to this issue, it lends some gravitas. It also opens up, perhaps, doors for some others to come forward. And over these 75 years, we have obviously seen that it wasn't enough. Movie stars started coming forward, rock musicians. The truth embargo is well constructed and very effective. So Paul was one of those. However, his timing was good. He made his decision to come forward in 2005, which was, Grant had gotten the documents on the Clinton Rockefeller Initiative with Clintons, and that was getting a lot of coverage. It was up on the web. We were moving forward a little bit on that. Podesta had made strong statements at the National Press Club in 2002, 2003, and I think was already collaborating somewhat with Leslie Kean. So Paul stepped in, pretty good time, and he was not just a man of gravitas, he was a man of stature. He was a very big, very tall, graceful, gracious, that type of thing. He's old school. And old school is almost impossible to find in the United States now. Maybe in Canada a bit, perhaps in England, but not down here. It's pretty much gone kindergarten down here. So for me, he was an example of what we would love to have as leaders in this country, as members of Congress and so forth. And so in that sense, he was a throwback to another time, and I enjoyed thinking about him. Now, as you know, he participated in the citizen hearing on disclosure, of course, as well as other events. But the citizen hearing disclosure for me was significant because he and I opened the event together. He spoke and I spoke. I think he spoke first. And that was great. It's one of many great aspects of this. All of it's on tape. All of it's been recorded. Those recordings will eventually be used for activist purposes. And Paul's legacy, I think, will last there as long as anything, because I think the citizen hearing will have a long history. People are going to refer to it. It's going to be part of the history and the study of this era. And Paul is right there, opening remarks, not shy, saying what he thought. And behind him were Richard Dolan and Grant and so many others. So it was like a family gathering in a way. I'll always remember that day. I think I just saw the footage the other day. It turns up from time to time. And the last thing I would say is this. I keep a section on my website called In Memoriam. I have a lot of people on that page. It's designed to give people a quick access to read about some of the people that have passed in this field, going all the way back to the 40s. Little picture. It's also recognition. Being in this field is not something you do if you want to get lots of recognition from the media or academics or even your peers. So this site is for that, In Memoriam. And he's up there now. And so I have spent a lot of time following the passings of the people in this field, particularly in the modern time. And what troubles me the most, I say trouble, what is toughest to deal with is the accidents. John Mack, of course, was accidentally killed in an unfortunate event in the UK. Mark Wolf, who was vigorous and in great health, out bicycling to keep in shape. I used to bicycle a lot. It's dangerous. He was hit from behind. Paul, of course, has had an accident as well, which most people will go, well, he had a great run, and he did. An unbelievable life, full, vigorous, had everything you'd want, except that he was in better health at 98 than I am. He had another 10 years left easily. And that hurts, right? Because if Paul just is a little more careful on those stairs, Paul is almost certainly going to see disclosure. He's going to see the confirmation come. And obviously he'll be well received in the post-disclosure world and an easy target for interviews and bios and what have you. And he missed it. And it really bothers me. The closer we get, the harder it is for me to accept these losses, because essentially everyone represents this simple fact.
Absolutely.
That the truth embargo has now lasted a lifetime, 75 years. And every month it outlives another one of us. And this is fundamentally offensive. This embargo should have ended decades ago.
Very true.
And the people in the government, I do not think, that manage this issue think about that. I don't know if it matters to them at all, but it matters to me. And so I will continue to follow and pay attention to how people are doing and what have you. And I just hope I have nobody else goes up on that list, and that's on that webpage, until we finally get the hearings and the confirmation of ET presence that we have earned over these last 7.5 decades.
Thank you, Stephen. Dr. Bob McGuire, we bring you in here now because even though you're relatively new to the field of ufology, you're still, someone who has got to, study about people who have been doing this for decades, namely Paul Hellyer. What is your thoughts on this? I'm going to get you to unmute there, Bob.
Sorry about that, Dave. How do we always do that? Anyway, my knowledge of Paul Hellyer actually went back to the 90s. And recall that there was the first Gulf War, and Bush was president, and then Clinton. And during that time, the United States had just rejiggered its warfighting doctrine to have kind of a field commander, and then all the different services would integrate into one action plan rather than them all being executed separately. And Paul Hellyer during that period was beginning to put together in his own mind the policy of fusing all the services in Canada, because it was really, really so very together in the United States, and was very, very effective in the Gulf War. So that, and a lot of people don't know that Hellyer was a prolific author. He's at least a dozen books. But he was what to an American would be a really serious patriot. Americans are, and Paul Hellyer was a patriot. He was very afraid in the 2000s that when all the Quebecois separatist stuff was happening, all sorts of other political instability inside of Canada. Not unlike the political instability we're having now. But anyway, Paul was concerned about it. And so he proposed what was called the One Big Party. And his One Big Party proposal was he convinced other parties to kind of work together for a while in a single coalition in this One Big Party. And he wrote a book about it. And his One Big Party was to prevent the takeover of Canada by its very large and powerful southern neighbor. So Paul was a big-time patriot, Canadian patriot, and he wanted it to survive and thrive and maintain its independence from the United States. So I knew about him, given all my interactions with the military and other things, and especially in the 1990s, when was my most active period in terms of doing these kinds of government operations for the military and the IC, which ended in 2002, and which I took on a technical job after that. Anyway, so that was my reason for knowing. And then, surprise, surprise, all of a sudden, the guy comes out and starts talking about UFOs, and I really thought it was interesting. But I wasn't really in the field when that happened. I just thought it was really interesting because I had followed this guy's career. I mean, I had been to Ottawa to the Ministry of Defense and had things that done there with them that I can't talk about, but it was just interesting to me.
Greg Cameron, I want to bring you in here if you don't mind, because a lot of people around Canada, when they look at Paul Hellyer, they'll look at the famous politician who tried to start the Canadian Action Party, the Deputy Prime Minister, former Minister of Defense, and we move forward to, everything that he tried to do with being on Canada's Privy Council for as long as he was. But how many really know him about being in ufology and taking this subject seriously, trying to press other politicians on both sides of the border to come out and speak about this publicly?
Yeah, we have a debt of gratitude that we have to give to Paul, because even though when he made this sort of move after he read the Corso book, he started to sort of repeat everything he heard, and he wasn't sometimes checking what he was saying, but he was respected. So it really didn't matter. It was sort of almost like the analogy where as long as they spell your name right, you're doing good. Any advertising is, any publicity is good publicity. So Paul was saying this, but he really raised the consciousness of the UFO issue because people really didn't check what he was saying. It was just that this fact that this guy was talking about it. I want to tell a story. Victor was there when this happened. As I mentioned before, that Paul, I don't think really knew when he was defense minister what was going on. He told me about this speech that he made in 1967. He said, I didn't write the speech. I don't even remember giving the speech.
Hi, I'm Tito Beverage, founder and master distiller at Tito's Handmade Vodka. When I got into this business, I used to make flavored vodka infusions for my friends as gifts. When I started to make a go of it, the owner of a local liquor store showed me the dust on some flavored vodka bottles that sat on the shelves. He said, if you can make a straight vodka so smooth that you could drink it just by itself, then you'd really have something. So I did. And now all these years later, we still only make one flavor, vodka flavored vodka. 80 proof Tito's Handmade Vodka, distilled and bottled in Austin, Texas. Tito'sVodka.com.
Unexpected trouble? CashNet USA can take the stress out of borrowing emergency funds. Our fast, secure application process makes it easy to apply online 24/7. Plus, CashNet USA offers same-day funding if approved before 10:30 a.m. Central Time, Monday through Friday. Additional terms may apply. Visit CashNetUSA.com or tap the banner to apply today.
And that's true. If you're a defense minister, you got people writing your speeches and stuff like that. So he may not have known, but there is one story that he did tell, and that was in Brantford. I don't know if you remember this, Victor. They had actually sort of imitated the citizens' hearing. So instead of having the congressmen and the senators, what Canada had done, I guess, Victor, you're behind this, where you'd got a bunch of reporters. So it was like the citizens' hearing, and the reporters were asking questions. And so we were all in this panel, and Paul was sitting right beside me on the panel. Dolan was there. You were there. I can't remember who else was there. But anyway, so it went around the first round, and they asked Paul Hellyer, so who do you think is running the show? And he said, you could tell he was guessing. He went, well, I don't know, the head of the Privy Council. He's just sort of guessing who he thinks might be in the loop as to who knows what's going on in Canada. So it went the first round of questions. The second round of questions, it comes back to Paul. They ask him another question, and at that point, he tells this story. And I just about fell over because he's sitting right beside me. He said, I do know one guy that knows what's going on. And he tells this story about this guy who is the head of emergency management in Canada. And this guy was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. And this Air Force guy, remember this, Victor? This Air Force guy had come to him and said, this guy has something that needs to get off his chest. And he's decided, you're the guy he wants to talk to. So Paul says, okay, I'll talk to the guy. And he doesn't talk to the guy. Then the Air Force guy phones him back and he says, he's about to go off the cliff. You better talk to him. So Paul calls this guy up, and the guy says, I just want to let you know, as the head of emergency management in Canada, I was briefed. I was taken down to the CIA in the United States. I signed my life away. I was told exactly what was going on. And I believe he actually said he was at Area 51 and he sat inside a craft. And that would make sense that if there's the emergency management guy would be one of the guys who would be read in. So that if there, something goes wrong and you've got to put money in the banks or whatever you got to do, he would be in the loop. And so he basically wanted to tell Paul that. He said, Paul, I just want to let you know, this thing's for real. This is actually going on. They took me to the United States. And I was just floored that he told that story. And he didn't see it as all that significant. He was more impressed with the general who had told him it's all true and more. And so he would get that stuff. And then he was just very interested in grabbing stories and publicizing them. And we owe him a gratitude because the consciousness really was rising because this guy was out there telling stories.
Victor.
Yeah, that's so true because it's funny you should bring that up, Grant, because at that symposium in Brantford, the National Symposium on Canadian UFO Disclosure, Paul was there, Travis Walton was there, Rich Dolan, Stanton Friedman was there, Nick Pope was there, and Steve was there, and as well as yourself. And that to me was a sort of a head dropper when Paul brought that up, because it was one of those things, as Dave alluded to earlier in the program, that he had a few secrets hidden away, and I'm not sure exactly what else we can get to in his files eventually after the family decides what to do with it. But I would imagine there are a lot of things that Paul might have been told by certain individuals that have not come to the surface yet. And one of those individuals is Shirley MacLaine. I guess just after Paul came forward, probably about 2 or 3 years after, he sort of was in the midst of almost a regret stage of what he had done on September 25th in the Convocation Hall. But what he did was he asked me, he said, who do I need to talk to? Who should I talk to about this whole issue? Because he really, other than the book by Philip Corso, he really didn't have any access to any specific individuals within the UFO research community to kind of corroborate or at least do more research in depth about the whole issue. So I gave him a list of names. It was about 6 or 7 names. And from that, he just launched into his own personal research about it. And one of them was Shirley MacLaine. And he went down to, he flew to Los Angeles and Hollywood, spoke with Shirley, and they had lunch and dinner a couple of times with he and his wife, Paul's wife, that is. And I don't know what Shirley told him at that time, but I know that when he came back, he did say that Shirley told him a few things that I think sort of are in his secret vault right now, and what they are. And I've tried to approach Shirley about it, and she's pretty tight-lipped. So these are some of the things that are yet to be disclosed about what Paul knows or what he did know about this whole issue. So it's a real ball of wool that we need to untangle at some point.
Does anybody know if Paul tried to influence politicians on both sides of the border, since he had a lot of friends in politics, to come forward about this subject, or was he quite quiet about this?
I know that what he did do, that's a really great question. And once again, memory fails me on the exact year, but at some point after he came forward, he and I talked about approaching one of the senators here in the Canadian Senate, and Jason, his name was Kenny. First name eludes me. Maybe Grant knows his name.
Wasn't it Jason?
In any case, that's right.
Kenny?
That's right. Exactly. He was the chair of the Canadian Senate Defense Committee, and Paul and I threw out a couple of ideas as to how we would approach the Senate, or how Paul could approach the Senate on this, because he knew Kenny very well, and I think they had been sort of colleagues with respect to running in elections at some point earlier on in their careers. And so Paul decided at that time, and when he was invigorated by this whole issue, he had a meeting with Jason Kenney at the time, and he went to Ottawa and sat down with Kenney face to face, and had a discussion about the whole thing. And I don't want to go over the whole conversation that he told me, but basically he came back, and I said, "Well, how did you make out?" And he said, I asked him, would Kenney be able to go forward on this? And Kenney said to him directly, he said, "Paul, this issue is so big, it's too big a fish for me to hook. I can't even come close to talking about this." So he did try to influence Kenney, but I think it's rather indicative that a senator of that stature, a chairman of the Senate committee here in Canada, would not touch the issue. His reasons for not doing it were never articulated to me. I'm not sure what Paul was told about it, but that's sort of an indication, Dave, as to how Paul did try to influence some high-profile people here in Canada to at least begin a narrative or a conversation about the whole UFO research aspect of UFOs in a very circumspect and specific ways, which they, I guess, just weren't willing to do.
Stephen, did you ever hear of Paul Hellyer potentially communicating his findings and his thoughts with anybody within the United States government, the Senate, the Congress people, or anybody like that?
If he'd done it, he might very well have made some contact, but he wouldn't have publicized it. But I'm not aware of that, no. Let me comment, though, that something that you mentioned about going to meet the senator. This is not the way it's supposed to be. It's backwards. When Rager Mitchell came forward, the NASA should have reached out to him instead of ignoring him. When the nuclear witnesses came forward repeatedly, Congress should have reached out to them. They talk about hearings, talk about the need for a hearing on the basis of national security. They didn't do that. over and over. They don't reach out. You have to go to them. This is bass backwards. And if you're seeing a world in which major nations are failing their people and their country and the planet, you're seeing the failure of policy across the board in almost every area. You cannot find a single area where the developed countries have policies which are in fact appropriate, effective, and will work. Because we have a political class that says, I'm not going to come to you. I don't care what you are or who you are. You have to come to me. And when you do, I will tell you it's too big. Meaning, I have a job. I want to keep the job. That means I do small things or nothing at all. These are the things I see when I think of Paul and Edgar, so many others. It's not just that there's a truth embargo. We have a dysfunctional state, like many in the past. And most of those are just dust the archaeologists look through occasionally with their brushes and brooms. That's where we're headed. Until we get an intelligence class, an academic class, and a political class, that when something important happens, they reach out to us.
Can definitely see that. Definitely see that. We've got about 40 seconds to go before we are going to go to break here. At the bottom of the hour, top of the hour, we have on our panel tonight, as we pay respects to the late and great Paul Hellyer, Canadian ufologist, Canadian politician, Canadian member of the Privy Council of Canada, passing away yesterday at the age of 98 years old. It's a good run, but man, wouldn't you love to know the secrets that are in his head when it comes to UFOs and whether or not we've been contacted. Going back to an email that I got from Paul, he definitely believed that Canada alone was in contact with two different extraterrestrial species. That is, the Canadian government in contact with two extraterrestrial species. Joining us tonight, we have Grant Cameron, Victor Vigiani, Steve Bassett, Dr. Bob McGuire, and Sinead Wellahan here for the big show where we pay tribute to Mr. Paul Hellyer. We're going to continue with hour number 2 about the importance of getting more politicians involved in this topic. Where do we go from here? Who will be the next one to step up to the plate? Our panel continues with hour 2 right next on Spaced Out Radio. All right, guys, we got 6 minutes. 6 minutes. Remember, we are all still live on YouTube. You can unlock your mics here if you wish. Chat away. I'll be right back. You guys hang out. Bear with me.
Thanks, Dave.
Sinead, you got the conch.
He's going for a butt, no doubt.
What was that?
He's going for a butt, no doubt.
Yeah, he's going to walk the dogs with his cigarette.
Oh.
Yeah, I should mention that when Paul came back from that meeting, and actually I was supposed to go with him, but something had happened within my family that I couldn't go. But Paul was quite shaken by the whole experience because he knew Jason Kenney very, very well. They'd been part of, I guess, an election campaign at some point, either him for Jason or Jason for Paul and being reelected. And for him to admit that this was too big a fish for Jason Kenney to approach, that to me really had indicated that this stuff is so well buried within the ethos of the Canadian government, as it is in most North American constituencies, that it's so hard to pry open. And as Steve just said a second ago, my goodness, this is not the way the system works. When you get a statesman like Paul Hellyer approaching another senator and saying, you know this, you know what's going on, just as well as I do, but you're afraid to do it. Why and how come? So I think those questions need to be answered, and how the hell you get them answered, who knows? Maybe we need another guy like Paul Hellyer to come forward and open that can of worms again. I don't know. It really pisses me off.
Well, I'll drag Dave into it because we know a couple of people who've been talked to in Canada, and it's always the same sort of thing. Is you're doing your little piece, and it's not in your little job description, and so you stay away from it. I think the other thing we should point out, Victor, is the idea that the Senate works different here in Canada than in the United States, where
Definitely, yeah.
the old boys club, where they give you a job for life and you're really not doing a hell of a lot of anything and have no power to do anything except block legislation.
Mm.
Yeah, it's an appointed body. Each prime minister has the opportunity to appoint senators. It's like the House of Lords in Britain. It's the same sort of concept. It's the old British parliamentary system. I mean, it's effective to a certain point, but after a while, it just becomes an old boys club. When you get hockey players like Frank Mahovlich appointed as a senator, you wonder how effective a body like that can really be in getting down to the nitty-gritty of issues. For those of you who don't know Frank Mahovlich, he was a hockey star who played for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and what he knows about politics could fit in a flea's navel, and you'd still have room for 3 caraway seeds.
That's like Tommy Tuberville, the former head coach of the Auburn University Tigers football team, is now the senator from Alabama. I mean, it's just like, good grief.
Yeah.
Remember when Arnold Schwarzenegger was the good old days? Remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but Arnold Schwarzenegger's got a brain.
Yeah.
By the
There
way,
were some things that he definitely did well in his time as governor of California, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's the most liberal Republican I know of.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Huh.
Very liberal.
There you go.
Well, I mean, politics are so blurry. We don't have to get into this, but the borders, or what borders there used to be between conservatives, liberals, and so on. It's all just become kind of a mush at this point over here. Anyway, that's what it is. For me.
I mean, Schwarzenegger's not one of these crazy right-wing Republicans because he married a Kennedy.
Until he cheated on it. But
yeah. Well,
by the way, Grant, Doug says hello. He's in the studio here. My dog.
Mike, from what state?
What's that?
What was that?
I said, Grant, my dog Doug says hello.
Oh, okay.
He's in the for people.
There you go.
There he is.
Yeah, boy. Bite him. Bite him.
Dougie.
Sick him.
No, he's not saying it. And people are always wondering, why don't you ever show Doug? Well,
yeah.
Well, you spent a lot of time coming up with that name.
Okay, Sinead, get your cats out. Let's bring your cats out. Let's have an animal show.
No way. It's different for girls. We instantly get branded as cat ladies. I'm not doing that.
There's a specific number of cats you're allowed to have before you become a cat lady, and it's not clear what that number is.
Exactly. There's a number.
Yeah.
When your house smells like the cat litter box, then you're a cat lady.
My friend Jay said to me, more than one means you're a cat lady. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I think you've got to have an excessive amount, 4 or 5. He said, no, I'm telling you, 2 cats, cat lady.
I'm a dog person. I have a Cocker Spaniel, and I'm missing him because my granddaughter took him off with her for 4 or 5 days.
We've got about 45 seconds.
There you go. Are we going to get into politics, Dave, with who knows in Canada? And
yeah, that's where we're going next.
Okay, let's do it.
I'm gonna plead ignorance.
We're dropping the gloves. Sinead, I have a request from Nicole that you have to come on here as a guest to tell your story.
Oh, I would love to.
Let's do it.
Yeah. I've been curious for a while.
All right, we got 10 seconds, guys. Big thank you to Bob, to Tim, and Mark for the super chats. It's a great way to support what we do on this show. Here we go with hour number 2 of the Paul Hellyer Tribute.
You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show.
Here we go with hour number 2 of Spaced Out Radio tonight. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We really do appreciate earning your listening ears wherever we are on this planet we call Earth. Hi to everyone listening in on our terrestrial affiliates around North America, digitally on TalkStream Live, Revolution Radio, and KPNL. All of our archives are free by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do old Davey the favor, hit that subscribe button. The Desert Clam has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Eulignus is your password. Use it wisely, Space Travelers, as the Clam sets the password each and every night right here on Spaced Out Radio. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram, Spaced Out Radio Show. We are joined tonight by Victor Vigiani, Steve Bassett, Grant Cameron, Sinead Wheelahan, and Dr. Bob McGuire here as we pay tribute to the passing of legendary UFO researcher Paul Hellyer, the former Canadian politician who passed away this past weekend at the age of 98. And Grant, I want to start with you on this next hour here, because there's always a big argument out there, and probably maybe a little bit put on by me, I'm not going to lie, because I always thought that Paul Hellyer knew way more about the UFO story than what he was really telling. And there's a lot of secrets that may never come out. Do you see a time where Paul Hellyer's secrets will come out, or his private books will come out, much like we've seen with Stanton Friedman?
Well, Desta, who's an assistant of mine here, she's doing all his books. So she's never mentioned any secret stuff. She actually helped him do his income tax last year, because all the book stuff, all the revenue from the books, she was helping him with that. All the translations that they were doing on the books and stuff like that. I'm not sure, because I know he had the same thing where he was talking about the 54 incident where said he was looking through his files and stuff like that. I'm always suspicious that I don't really think the Canadian parliamentary people really know too much. It's very party-oriented, and I think they just basically sign off. You may have one or two people inside the military who have a need to know, who pass it on to the Americans and get these stuff back. I still think the Americans are running the show, because you know that there's some members of Parliament who were looking into this, but they have not done anything. They just sort of, got some information, dug for some information. We know at least 2 U.S. ambassadors were briefed on the subject. In fact, in 1950, if you followed the Canadian government story, Wilbur Smith was dealing, all the material that Wilbur was dealing with was through the Canadian Embassy in Washington, D.C., and the third ambassador at the embassy actually said to Wilbur, the ambassador has told us.
Hi, I'm Liz Munoz, CEO of Torrid. And at Torrid, we know how hard it is to find a bra that looks great and feels super comfortable, especially if you're a bigger or curvy girl. So we have spent the last 2 years building the perfect everyday wire-free bra with the belief that it should feel as good as it looks. It gives all the support and shape you'll ever need without any of the wires. Honestly, it's the first bra you'll forget to take off when you go to bed. So come to Torrid.com and try our life-changing wire-free bra today.
What am I doing with this paper shredder? Well, now that C Spire offers no contract $45 unlimited plan, I don't need to hold on to all these contracts. We're going to need a bigger paper shredder. Keep your number, skip the contract with no contract $45 unlimited. Terms and conditions apply. See cspire.com/no contract for plan details.
Not to talk about this, and they were basically waiting for the Americans to make a statement, because according to it looked like from the stuff that there was going back and forth between Wilbur and the embassy, was that if they thought the Americans had a craft and they were about to make an announcement that they had a downed craft, and nothing ever came out of that. I dealt with 2 politicians in my time. One was James Richardson, who was a big-time Liberal guy here in Winnipeg. And I think he was Minister of Defense as well at one point. And the other one was Jack Murda. And the sightings that we had were in Carman, Manitoba. And Jack Murda, that was his district. So the people were asking him questions. And it all depends when you want help in Canada. If you want help from a member of parliament, whether he's in power or whether he's out of power. So when Murdo was out of power, he actually got in a ministerial inquiry. You can actually ask a question, and they have to answer it for you, because this is coming from a minister. We want this answered. As soon as he got into power, he forgot who I was. He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't answer my letters, anything. And that's the way it works. It's sort of like whose ox is going to get gored. And so the people, if you can get them right now, there's a couple of people in the opposition party who are interested. But I will absolutely guarantee you, Dave, the minute they get into power, they ain't going to talk to you anymore. They're not going on the record. They're not going to, even if they become defense minister, and the one guy could become the defense minister or the minister of defense, they're going to run for the hills because nobody wants to be attached to this issue. And that's what Victor brought up, was this where they run from it. Because what are you going to do if you're a lone senator or whatever? How do you deal with it? They're basically just trying to do their job and trying to stay out of trouble and trying to get reelected. And we have to remember, I pointed out, the American audience should know that in Canada, Victor mentioned the Senate. In Canada, the Senate has no power whatsoever. In the United States, the Senate is the big place in town. Here, it's like like the House of Lords that Victor brought up, where it's like an appointed thing where you stack your guys into the Senate and they have a good life and they get all this money until they're like 85 years old or whatever, and they really don't do anything except block legislation. So it's kind of you got to sort of understand how Canadian politics works, and the Canadians really there's not very many people who are really willing to step up and take a chance or fight an issue. They're all basically very party aligned. That whatever the whip says, that's what they do. And so I wouldn't hold out anybody sort of upsetting the apple cart in Canada.
Victor, would you concur with that?
Oh yeah, I totally agree, because as Grant pointed out, the Canadian Senate is essentially an appointed body, and they can either once the legislation is passed in our House of Commons, so let's say a piece of legislation on any issue is passed, it has to go before the Senate for approval. And literally 9 times out of 10, all the Senate does is just put its stamp of approval on it, and it just goes forward. It's not the same as what happens in the United States with the House of Representatives develops a piece of legislation and goes to the Senate, and it gets either passed or not because of the influence that senators have. The Canadian senators do not have that. They're basically a rubber stamp organization. So if anything were to come up with respect to an inquiry or hearings or anything like that in the House of Commons, and they manage to get something like that passed in the House of Commons, the likelihood of it going forward and passing through the Senate is virtually zero, and maybe even less. So that's the way Canadian politics works. And unfortunately, I sent a briefing document last month, and I told Paul about it, and we sent I sent the same document to the senators in charge of the Defense Committee, the same one that Jason Kennedy was chairman of, and it's a briefing document on the issues of the day, the whole UAP issue that's in the ATIP program and all the things that are going on within the United States. And I asked the Senate, Gwen Boisvert, she's the chair of the committee, what is the Canadian position on what's going on in the American Senate? And I had not heard back from them at all, one way or another, about this. Not even a sort of a correspondence say, yes, we've received your information and we will look into it. Not a word, not a whisper from the Senate. And I sent it to all the members of that particular committee. So that's just the way that things work up here, and maybe that's kind of reflective of the closed mouth situation that's going on in other parts of the world too, internationally, with respect to how this issue has to be brought forward. You literally have to pry this thing open with a stick of dynamite, and it just doesn't work that way up here in Canada.
Dr. Bob McGuire, I want to bring out a quote that Mr. Hellyer had sent to me. He said, "I try not to follow U.S. politics that closely, but I doubt that either of the two major parties has any plans to make the UFO phenomena an issue. We don't count as in us Canadians, and have issues that are far more important to us than the UFO cover-up. Do you think this is the case today, and do you think that, there's still a major cover-up going on? You're muted, Bob.
Sorry about that. There's a lot of fighting going on inside the Pentagon and in the U.S. intelligence community where people are trying to stop things from going forward. However, we have a major countervailing set of power, which is now fighting against this, trying to shut it down. Catherine Hicks gave her order. It sounds to me now like the internal office that's going to handle this inside the Pentagon is going to have cleared people all the way up through SAP, and which has been coming out in the last couple of days. Steve probably knows more about this than I do, since he kind of watches it every single day. But I've been keeping up with it from afar and paying attention. I wanted to bring up something before I forget about it. When Paul Hellyer, the thing that was so amazing to me about him kind of not being cognizant of what was going on with the UFO stuff is when he was defense minister. What's our favorite Canadian UFO incident?
Shag Harbor.
He was the defense minister when we had Shag Harbor, and he didn't know a single thing about it. That is really strange that he would know nothing.
Very strange. Steve Bassett, let's bring you in here because, this comes to a lot of the political paradigms we see in ufology today, going back 50, 60 years to where we are now in regards to what the truth is. You talk a lot about the truth embargo. You talk about how it really crosses a lot of borders, not just here in North America, but crosses oceans as well. When you look at this entire loss of Paul Hellyer, do we see another politician stepping up to the forefront here? Is it Marco Rubio? Is it Mark Warner? Is it somebody else who's going to take that next step that Hellyer moved the chain so high, now we're going to get it higher?
Mark Rubio's action was of another level entirely. When he called for the report after being briefed by Mellon, and witnesses, he essentially signaled, and he was chair at the time, remember, could still be chair if the election had gone another way. He signaled to them that, okay, now we're going to deal with this. It's that simple. You don't put that language into that report simply because you want to score some points with people like myself and Grant and Victor. You don't do that. You do that and you take that risk because the reward will be great. What's the reward? Rubio sent the message. The Defense Department got the message. They delivered a 400-page classified report, gave briefings, showed film, produced a public report that was of no consequence, really, but they couldn't produce anything more than that. A lot of people thought, well, why didn't they? No, you can't do that. That's just because Rubio asked for it doesn't mean they're going to do that, but they did something, right? And Rubio, I'm sure, got that. He understood. He understood that, but he knew that by calling for a public report, it would generate far more media coverage than if it was just a classified report. You can imagine? Because the media is looking forward to what's going to be in that report. In a classified report, they're not going to get to see it, at least not right away. So it was brilliant strategy. He really put the Pentagon in the corner. Meanwhile, Lou was kind of pressing on the Pentagon from another direction, along with Danny. So I essentially, before the pandemic started to regroup and surge again, it was clear to me the Pentagon had pretty much thrown in the towel. It's over. Now, what does that mean? Is it over in 5 years, 4 years, 3 years? It's over pretty quick. Why? Because too much has gone down in the last 3 years. It was one thing to walk away from the 701 undetermined reports that Blue Book came up with and just walk away with that in 1969. It's another thing for them to say, let's walk away from the New York Times articles, the scores of witnesses that have come forward, the cases, the coverage, the thousands of articles, Rubio involved, the briefings of Congress. Will just, no, it's over. And so they have acknowledged that, and they're going to cooperate. They're going to provide more reports, and at some point, it's up to the Congress when to call the hearings. The Pentagon doesn't call the hearings, and I can assure you, the Pentagon is not going to tell Rubio or Warner when they're going to have their hearings. They will have it. Carson has already said we're going to have them, and they're not going to let Andre Carson lead the pack on this. They're going to step in, but wisely, with 3 major bills on the table and unusual circumstances too, not just your typical legislative circumstances. With a massive resurge of COVID is now starting to take children down by the thousands, and with the schedules and so forth, the Senate and House, it's pushed back, but not for long. 90 days is when they said they're going to run another report. Fine. That should be roughly on the other side of the surge. And again, all they have to do is call the hearings, and that's it. So I'm very confident we can still have disclosure this year. And the fall works for me. So just keep paying attention and wait for that first announcement. Yes, we're having hearings.
Victor.
Yeah, I do. I just would like to throw this out to the group and maybe specifically have Steve respond too. With respect to the whole UAP report from the Director of National Intelligence that was put forward, the 6 or 9 pages, depending on how you want to define what pages are. Steve, I guess maybe you might be the first person to respond. Why do you think other governments did not respond at all to this kind of initiative from Rubio and the whole Authorization Act? Under normal circumstances, anything that comes about that's that specific with respect to how the Defense Department within the United States operates, even within NATO, and with the way funding happens within the Pentagon, a report that contains something on UAP would definitely kind of jar some of the other NATO countries to even kind of whisper a response. Why has there been absolute dead silence from other countries about the Authorization Act and that component about UAP reports? What's going on there? I just do not understand that.
First of all, there has been articles in the UK papers. I'm sure there's been articles in the foreign language papers, France, Italy, and so forth. It's not like there's nothing happening. What you really mean is, why hasn't there been a relatively overt statement from some of these governments? Before the Major League Baseball games here in the States, oftentimes there'll be some people out in the field and warming up a little bit. But when the game starts, they have to leave the field, right? When the Major League teams get on the field, you leave. And so these other governments know what's going down here. They know we're heading for ending this embargo. It will happen here in the United States unless Russia or China makes a bold move. And so they're getting out of the way. There's nothing to be gained by them popping up and doing what? Encouraging them?
Let me make one quick comment about the protocol. You surely do not believe that the Prime Minister of the UK or Australia or Canada are going to speak to this issue before Joe Biden does. I mean, it's Absolutely just not going to happen.
There's nothing to be gained. Nothing.
No gain at all. So they're going to wait for the United States to come forward. And Avril Haines and the Deputy Secretary of Defense have now said, and they've followed up, and there's going to be a massive uptick in the amount of stuff that Warner and Rubio get. Rubio is a hero, but I'm going to tell you, Steve knows this already, but let me emphasize it. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence is the most bipartisan committee in all of Congress. They do not work at cross purposes. They do everything they can to leave politics at the door, and Marco Rubio and Mark Warner are like that together on this issue. So it's going to happen. Steve knows this, but I'm nobody in the English speaking world or in the allies, first and second tier, except possibly Israel, is going to get out in front of us and say anything.
Yeah, and the other person who said absolutely nothing, and that's not surprising, is Joe Biden.
Yeah,
he doesn't want to get in the way of the Pentagon finally getting this done, providing what is necessary for the Congress.
There's nothing to be gained from that.
No.
And he's not getting asked, and he's not going to say anything. It's, of course, exactly appropriate. The people that are going to speak are the members of Congress. It is their time. And it's worth noting, and I don't want to, this needs to be emphasized. I know they're thinking about it. Matt, you're an American citizen. What are you looking at today? Unless you're not rich, okay? Let's say you're not rich. You're just an American citizen. You pay the bills. You're getting along. But what do you get in every day? The murder rate is high. Murders every day. Cops are being killed. California is burning down. Massive droughts are coming. Fires overseas.
COVID everywhere.
On and on and on.
COVID all day long.
Can you think of anything motivating and inspiring that is turning up in the news for at least 2 years? Okay, now, you're a member of Congress, and you realize you have opportunity to engage probably the most amazing, invigorating, exciting issue of all time. Has a little national security aspect to it, but hey, right? There's a reason that sci-fi movies are the most lucrative in all of film. They make billions of dollars because it's exciting and interesting and it's looking forward. And I assure you, these members of Congress are tired of getting emails and threatening phone calls about how idiots they are, or stupid they are, or how they're killing people with their COVID policy, or why they can't do anything about global warming, and on and on and on. And they have a chance to push all of that aside and be able to address the concept of extraterrestrials and potential disclosure, and maybe even are going into space, really into space, not Branson into space, not Musk into space, but the real deal. And you think they're going to not, oh yeah, what's better than this? And so, again, it's all coming together. And there's nothing really stopping it right now except some timing and a terrible, terrible pandemic. But the ETs haven't gone anywhere. And the press is ready to write another 1,000 articles, I can assure you, because they're very aware of how well those articles were received, how many papers they sold. And J.J. Abrams just dropped a multi-million-dollar documentary.
And it is
terrific. Quite a bit about it. Yeah,
it is terrific. It's very good. Not like the piece of crap that's on Netflix.
Well, I'll tell you, I binge watched that whole thing, 6 episodes, and there is some good stuff there. The Germans that did it are not Americans, but they're smart, and there's actually a lot of value there, but it's a little rough-edged. But think about it. It's the number 5 best-watched program on Netflix right now. Yeah. It's being binge-watched, and then you've got Showtime, and there's other streaming services that have stuff in the works, I can assure you. So you're going to walk away from this? It's just a question of the timing. You want to do it, and I can assure you that you don't want to bring it up when you're fighting over not only a massive infrastructure bill, a massive for the people's bill, and a voting rights bill that are going to narrowly squeak through. And so absolutely, you're going to stay off to the side. That doesn't mean that they don't know where it's going. Excuse me.
Everyone, I'm going to get you guys to hold on right there. And Sinead, when we come back, I want to get to a question from Joe in our chat room about whether or not Paul Hellyer knew and talked with Stanton Friedman about their findings, and I know you'll be the best one for that, but we're looking forward to it. We continue on with the Spaced Out Radio UFO panel tonight of Dr. Bob McGuire, Sinead Whalehan, Stephen Bassett, Victor Vigiani, and Grant Cameron as we celebrate the life of Paul Hellyer, UFO research icon, Canadian politician for 50-some years, part of the Privy Council, a big man, probably body checked like Gordie Howe back in the day. I'm pretty sure of it. Seemed to have sharp elbows. We'll be back with more Spaced Out Radio when we continue right after this. All right, if you guys hear snoring, that's my dog.
Yeah, he was also the one and only person to ever hold the position of senior minister. The one and only person. After that, you had deputy prime ministers.
Wow. And actually, regarding Joe's question, I want to check with everybody because I'm pretty positive that Paul Hellyer and Stanton Friedman did have communication back and forth. But I just want to verify that with Grant because from what I recall, we still have boxes of stuff we have to go through. There's so much material. It's incredible.
Oh yeah, it's gotta be unbelievable.
Well, you can talk about the fact that we were supposed to go there like in 2 weeks, but now because of COVID.
Yeah, we had to cancel it. The travel plans are just way too complicated.
Yeah, once you cross the border, it's 3 COVID tests, and if you fail one of them, you're 14 days in a hotel.
At your expense.
At your expense.
Yeah, I mean, here, like I'm an amateur radio operator. We were supposed to have the first massive amateur radio convention right next to Marshall Space Flight Center in the state I live in. Yeah. And it looks to me like it's going to be a flop because of COVID.
Yeah.
Because Alabama is one of the worst states in the country in terms of vaccinations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't realize until we started to move what's involved. It was unbelievable. $250 for a COVID test, and you got to have your COVID coming back in the country, and it's just incredible. You can see moving, especially across borders now, is like insanity to try to do that. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, we're keeping our fingers crossed for the 18th when we're leaving. I'm going to keep my everything crossed, actually. But
whether the Americans will let us in.
Raising Cane's is celebrating 25 years. That means 25 years of serving over 2.5 billion cooked-to-order chicken finger meals. And 25 years of saying drive-through rhymes. Lots and lots of times. Oh, and 25 years of the same mascot. Okay, different mascots with the same name. And 25 years of serving our communities. Thanks for making us your chicken fix since way back in '96. Raising Cane's, 25 years, one love.
Got an occasion that's worth a celebration? Well, nothing says celebration like flowers from ProFlowers. Surprise your special someone with brilliant bouquets starting at just $19.99 plus shipping and handling from ProFlowers.com. See website for details.
And we're stealing jobs or whatever, and we go through that nonsense. And
yeah,
there is a kind of massive migration from south to north, if as long as you guys let them. That's a massive migration.
Yeah, that's the thing with this subject is that there's so many other things that people are thinking about now that
Steve knows this. Steve knows because of his political action. It's just everybody's distracted to hell and back. I mean, right now, kids are going back to school and they're going to get COVID in droves because they're not vaccinated.
Yeah, they need to mask up. They need to get the authorization so that they can move the vaccinations into the kids. But the flip side is what I told you. You remember the early 60s. The Vietnam War was slowly getting underway. And it got worse and worse and worse. And if you weren't part of the sexual revolution or the druggies or something, which I wasn't, I managed to miss all of that, it was awful. Vietnam War. And then the space program got going. And the space program became our outlet. It was like, hey, however awful it was in Vietnam, by God, we're going to go to the moon. And people forget about that. We haven't had anything really like that since. And no disrespect to Elon Musk, but I'm sorry, or Branson and his little trip into upper atmosphere. It's nothing. It's nothing. And so we desperately need this. And so there is a distraction that helps to keep the lid on. On the other hand, there's a desperate need to take the lid off. And if you're seeing it go back and forth. But ultimately, there's only one way, and that's forward now. You cannot go backward from where we are. And that's the most important thing that's happened in the first half.
For the first time, the last 2 weeks have now made me as positive that Steve is right as I've ever been. I've always thought he was a really, really positive person about this, and I always see the negatives that are going on and so forth. But I've now, given the announcement that the person that heads the UAP task force inside the Pentagon is going to be SAPCO cleared, that is a huge. I mean, Steve is exactly right. The Air Force has surrendered.
Well, the DoD is surrendered. The Air Force is still silent.
But they've surrendered.
When the Air Force steps in with something positive on this, that'll be a huge indication.
Huge, sure.
Yeah, because they don't want to sit it out all the way to the end. The Navy is covered. The Army is really kind of not a player. I don't think most people think about the Army as a big player here. But
one second, guys, we got 30 seconds here, so I'm going to cut you off on that. I'm just going to ask to bring the COVID chatter down because we try and stay away from certain topics on this show, that being one of them, no offense. And thank you so much to our super chatters. We got 509er, we got Bob, we got Tim, and we got Mark. And we got to get going here in about 10 seconds with this great panel talking about the life of Paul Hellyer. And Joe, we'll get to your question when we come back right now. Second half of Spaced Out Radio is now underway. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate earning your listening ears. Reminder that if you miss portions of this show or others, check out our free archives by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Just do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Let's get to the panel right now because we are talking about the life of Paul Hellyer, who passed away this past weekend at the age of 98, the legendary Canadian politician, along with our good friends on this panel looking into the UFO phenomena from a practical and political point of view. And our panel tonight, we have Victor Vigiani, Grant Cameron, Steve Bassett. We have Bob McGuire and Sinead Wheelahan. And Sinead, we're going to start with you on this one because Joe is asking in the chat room, did Paul Hellyer know and ever talk to Stanton Friedman?
Well, I don't feel the best qualified person to answer this, but I can tell you what I do know. The reason why I'm not the best qualified person is because we have not actually been able to fully dive into the research with Stanton Friedman yet. Grant and I had some travel plans. We've had to change them. But originally our plan was to fly out to New Brunswick, go to the University of Fredericton, New Brunswick in person and go through, basically surround ourselves with mounds of paper and go through Stanton Friedman's files and see what we could find. But there have been some files that have been transferred to us digitally. There's been a bit of conversation going on. I have not been able to get to it as deeply as I would have liked to, frankly. I'm a public school teacher. I work with special needs kids. This year was absolutely bonkers, more so than usual. So my job was ruling my life. But the Stanton Friedman files are something that are, I cannot wait to dive into. What I do know, aside from those mounds of paper we haven't gone into yet, is that, they did know each other. I'm not sure how much they communicated, but I know that they felt, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Richard would know probably better than I would, but I believe they felt a bit of a kinship in terms of being leaders in the field who, did face a fair amount of stigma, a fair amount of ridicule. They both felt they had to be, Stanton Friedman definitely not middle and late of his career. He was very, very outspoken about what he believed in and very passionate about it, very committed to it, which is part of the reason why he's so incredible as a researcher and so inspiring. Paul Hellyer was more conservative. He did come out in 2005, admitted that he believed in UFOs, which was a huge deal at the time, considering his extensive academic and professional background. He's a brilliant man. He's highly, highly accomplished. And there was written communication between Mr. Hellyer and Stanton Friedman, where I believe they were discussing, issues generally about what could be happening in ufology. But I don't believe there were any big secrets that were, at least not that we know yet, that were communicated between the two of them. That would be a question that would be better directed to Grant. But we're expecting to find some pretty wonderful stuff when we do go over there. I mean, one thing about Mr. Hellyer I'd just like to highlight is that he really was, again, people have been talking that he was such a man of integrity. He really had a great deal of courage, of conviction, and was very passionate about what he believed in. And I feel like there's some interesting, as Bob was alluding to very politely earlier, there's no way that Mr. Hellyer could not have known about events such as Shag Harbor. There's just no way. He had to have known more than he was letting on, at least outside of private conversations, even though Victor has said that he really didn't even say that much sometimes to people he knew very well. So hopefully we will find out more of what he actually knew. But I feel like along the way in his career, there have been some kind of subtle hints about what he might have known. For example, he had a bit of a spat with, this is one of my favorite things about him, because he did so firmly believe in what he believed in and was quite, frank speaking up about it. He had a bit of a spat with Stephen Hawking. So Stephen Hawking is a hero of mine, brilliant man, moved the field of science far forward, faced incredible physical obstacles, that whole thing. He's a remarkable person. But he was saying that he thought that if there were extraterrestrials, that they were most likely malevolent, that they were coming here to Earth with the intention of harm. This is what Stephen Hawking said. And Paul Hellyer spoke up vehemently and said, no, I disagree with that. I do not think that that is the case. I think that they have been here to help us for thousands of years. They've been participating in our life here on Earth for thousands of years. I believe he said that there were 4 different races, 4 different types of ETs that we've been in touch with, and that the United States is in touch with 2 and Canada is in touch with 2. But he really believed that they have been around for a very long time, specifically that they were here to help with our progress and the development of our societies and our cultures, and specifically with regard to technology. But what's interesting is, so I feel like Mr. Hellyer, pretty regularly, maybe not outwardly, but definitely felt that, the human beings, we are the biggest risk to ourselves. It's not ETs that are the biggest risk. We are the biggest risk to ourselves. And in fact, the landing strip, the first and perhaps only official UFO landing strip that Grant was talking about, that Mr. Hellyer officiated the opening of in 1967, 2 years before the moon landing even happened. There's a plaque at the site of that UFO pad, which, by the way, is in a town called St. Paul, which I love, Alberta. So Paul Hellyer went and officiated, in St. Paul, Alberta, the first ever UFO landing pad, kind of like that. In any case, the plaque and the statement that is on the plaque at the site of this landing pad, Mr. Hellyer had a hand in writing this, apparently. And the statement clearly says that the site is a symbol and meant to be a powerful symbol of interconnected relationships between our planet and others in a friendly way. And in fact, I can quote from an article about the landing back from the landing pad back in 1967 when it opened. It was in the newspaper, local newspaper, that it was meant to be a symbol of keeping space free from human warfare. So, Mr. Hellyer flew to participate in this ceremony. He willingly went. He chose to be there. This was not something he was forced to do. Right, he chose to be there. This is in 1967. So I feel like he's saying the military-industrial complex is the real thing. I do not agree with it. And then along the way through his career, he's been repeatedly reframing the narrative about evil ETs and saying that really it's us that are causing, the most damage to ourselves and to our planet. And there is no better example than climate change. And Mr. Hellyer was very, very, very passionate about the planet and protecting it. And in fact, he wrote a book called The Light at the End of the Tunnel, a survival guide for the human race, I think, or the human species. And in that book, he talks about how devastated he was that the Copenhagen conference did not work out, because he had really been hoping that we would be able to move forward in economy without so much dependence on oil, right? Again, Edgar Mitchell said that Mr. Hellyer's really top 2 priorities were exopolitics and sustainability, and that had to do with environment, not money. Right. So he wrote another book where the title gives it all away. I'm going to stop after this, by the way. I'm just really fired up because I think he's a really remarkable man. He's an incredible, he was an incredible man. And he needs to be recognized and celebrated for what he has done, because he may not have been, one of the most famous. He was Canadian. Americans always do it bigger than us, right? So the leaders over in the States get the most attention. Mm-hmm. But Mr. Hellyer was a really, really important man, not just in Canadian ufology, but ufology in general. He was one of the first people who was in a high-ranking military position to own up to having had a UFO experience himself, not to mention believing in them and feeling like it was a relevant topic that needed to be explored, right? So he's talking about the silliness of our banking system. He's talking about how these things really need to be reframed to benefit us and benefit our planet, so that we are able to have progressive relationships with interspecies, other species. So there was a title of a book that he wrote that was called Liberation, the Economics of Hope. And I just love that. I feel like that says so much about Mr. Hellyer himself. He saw the inner workings of government and all of the nuts and bolts and the cranking wheels and, all the kind of the mechanics of it all, that it can be a bit limiting, right? He saw all of that and the secrecy and the stigma and experienced the whole thing, but still had such an attitude of hope and that human beings could really do better, that we had the power and the ability to do better, and all we had to do was choose that. So I find him an incredibly inspiring figure and somebody who is just really representative of courage, of forward thinking, of, cooperation in many, many forms beyond our planet.
Question for the panel, and I thank you for that, Sinead. This one comes from Tony. He is asking, was Paul Hellyer ever approached by the To the Stars Academy?
These guys would know better than me, for sure.
Not that I'm aware of. No, not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Was he ever approached by anybody, Victor or Grant, in the Canadian government about speaking towards what he knew about the extraterrestrial phenomena?
One way or another, in favor or against, or what do you...
Well, I mean,
be quiet about it?
Did any party or any politicians pull him to the side and said, hey, I want to know what you know?
I know that there was a politician, and Grant could help me on this too, from Quebec, Denis Cordera. He was a member of Parliament at one time, and now I think he is the mayor of Montreal, or he was a former mayor of Montreal. And I know Denis Cordera had an interest in the UFO issue, and he may have at some point spoke about it in Canadian Parliament. I know I sent several correspondence to him, and he did have a very good understanding about it. Now, whether or not he and Paul ever talked about it, I always included my emails to Denis to Paul, but I don't recollect any conversation between them or among any other politicians that I was aware of. But there have been statements within Parliament with the New Democratic Party. I don't know the fellow's name, but he had a long dissertation about the UFO issue. But they never really, for some reason, never made the connection with Paul. Maybe because they felt that Paul had gone too far. I'm not quite sure why Paul never got into the narrative about it with members of Parliament. They just never made the connection, and I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe just one of those keep away issues that parliamentarians don't want to associate themselves with someone who's so in-depthly involved in the issue, which is very strange to me. But I want to go back to what we just said earlier with respect to Sinead's comments. And Paul had a way of raising the level of conversation about every single issue that he approached. He didn't look at it from an ordinary perspective. He had an intense intellect to see through issues, not around them or against issues. He saw through the issues, and he was able to raise the narrative. Now, if you really think about it, no other politician, back in 2005 or even earlier, had the gumption to come forward and raise the level of conversation the way Paul had done in his own unique way. That just didn't happen. The only other politician that I'm aware of was Lord Hill Norton, a British Minister of Defense, who did a similar kind of thing, but didn't have the same profile that Paul managed to put forward. But Paul had a way of raising the level of conversation. I think that's the key issue about what Sinead is talking about. He was responsible internationally for raising this issue, and that's one of the things that his legacy will hold true to for a long, long time. And I'm just glad that that we've all been part of witnessing that with respect to what Paul did for this whole issue.
All right. Solar Warden is asking, Mr. Cameron, that would be you, Grant, do you know what Mr. Hellyer's opinion was on ufology and its potential relationship to consciousness?
Well, Paul was a very religious man. He understood the consciousness aspect to it. I don't know if I ever discussed with him. One of the things I think I can point out that people don't really realize, I don't think UFOs was Paul's big issue. Paul's big issue was the banking thing. He actually went on a tour across Canada, which I think he basically paid for. He was furious about the banking and how banking works and what a scam it is, and the people that control the world are controlling the money in the banks and stuff like that. So I think we should point out Paul was a very, very religious man. He was deep, and one of the weird things he told me at one point was one of the people that was involved in the cover-up, I can't remember who it was in the early days with Smith, he actually went to church with him, and I think he was in a United Church in Toronto, and it was either Salant or some of these guys he knew these guys from church. So that's the thing I think I should point out to people. Paul was very, very, very religious. He saw everything in that terms, and the consciousness thing. I think we had one discussion about consciousness. He knew that had a connection to it, but he was very much into the conspiratorial. He really figured that there was people out there who were manipulating the system and were playing around with stuff. I remember I told the story my father had told, and it sometimes goes down as a UFO crash that occurred in the middle of Canada. And I remember Paul put it in his book. He wanted me to tell the story to him, and then he came back to me and he said, "Can I put it in the book?" He was fascinated. My father told the story that a radar tech who actually worked for the Canadian government flying saucer program in the 1950s had been at a radar thing, and they'd seen this thing coming over the poles, and they didn't really know what it was. I'm pretty sure it was a U-2. This is 1959. It was coming over the poles and was coming down, down, down. And I know my father was with the Department of Transport, and the accident investigation people were in the same office as him. And the accident investigation guy went up. My father told me the stories numerous times. The guy went up there to investigate because it's a crash on Canadian territory. And they didn't know it was a UFO or whatever it was. And I think it turned out to be a U-2. But he went there and he said they had this thing surrounded already. The accident investigation guy went up there. And Paul loved this story. They went up there and the guy said, "Sir, you better listen." He was the African-American guy. He said, "Sir, I would advise you to turn around and leave." And he said, "What do you mean? I'm an accident investigation guy. You're on Canadian territory. I'm here to investigate the accident." And they had a rifle and stuck it in the guy's stomach and said, "Sir, I'd advise you to turn around and leave." And he didn't really see what they were guarding, but he came back to my father and he told the story that he had actually gone to the phone. This is back in '59. So they phoned to Ottawa and they said, "These Americans are here and something's crashed and they won't let us on the site." And they said, "Hang on." They phoned him back in half an hour and they said, You better let the Americans do what they want." And this accident investigation guy said, "Goddamn Americans, they think they own everything." And so Paul loved this story, and he loved these conspiratorial stories about, especially the banking thing. He used to get really, really upset about the banking thing, about what a scam this was. And I remember he did this tour, and I'm pretty sure he lost a lot of money on it. He wrote a couple of books about it. But that was his big thing. And so he tied the UFO thing into this banking thing, that there was these guys there that they were up to no good, and the sort of the Illuminati type thing. He really loved that kind of stuff. But it was basically based on the banking thing. And he was some sort of expert on banking. He was not a stupid guy. He was in the government. And one last comment on the files. One of the weird things about the Stanton Friedman files is that I think one of the problems we have in ufology is that a lot of people are just in it for entertainment. Because I've offered everybody, I can, with a click of a mouse, I can give anybody access to the Stanton Friedman files. Everything that we got, 6,000 pages the first round. We're going back for a second round. And there's stuff like a piece of the Roswell crash. There's this Cuban fighter jet that gets taken out of the sky. Stanton gets involved.
Raising Cane's is celebrating 25 years. That means 25 years of serving over 2.5 billion cooked-to-order chicken finger meals. And 25 years of saying drive-thru rhymes. Lots and lots of times. Oh, and 25 years of the same mascot. Okay, different mascots with the same name. And 25 years of serving our communities. Thanks for making us your chicken fix since way back in '96. Raising Cane's, 25 years, one love.
Got an occasion that's worth a celebration? Well, nothing says celebration like flowers from ProFlowers. Surprise your special someone with brilliant bouquets starting at just $19.99 plus shipping and handling from ProFlowers.com. See website for details.
With Navy intelligence, and there's FOIAs. There's a really big story. I knew he'd been involved in this in 1967. I put it out. I'd give people access to the files, and I'd say, if you ever see anything, because I'm helping them to read the files, read all these Stanton Friedman files, and if you see anything interesting, tell me what it is, because I don't have time to read it. And nobody's ever come back to me with a single thing and said, oh, did you see this file? And so that's what I think. It's a lot of work to do the files, to go in there and see, like with Hellyer's files. I mean, we're trying to do Stanton Friedman's files. I can absolutely guarantee you nobody except maybe Victor will look a little bit into Paul Hellyer's files. This is a long, involved process. You have to sit in a library or an archives for weeks and go through this stuff and scan it or film it or whatever. It's a long process. And I'd be very surprised if we ever find anything in Hellyer's files. We've done it with the Friedman files, and it has gone nowhere. Nobody really cares. Nobody could care less. You put a really interesting document up, and people go, oh, that's pretty cool, and then they're off to the next story the next day. A lot of ufology is people just interested in what's the next story. They're not really interested in putting the pieces together. They're just interested in, tell me a good story. And you know how people go through Facebook. They're flip. They're flipping through Facebook, through the stories, and nobody's really paying attention. They're just getting entertained by what's going on. And that may be one of our problems.
Got a question here from Joe, who's asking, does anybody know what Paul's UFO experience was? Victor, go ahead.
Yeah, very briefly. Paul had, and I don't quote me on the year, but it was a gathering at his lodge up north in northern Ontario in Lake Muskoka called Arundel Lodge, and Paul and his family have had that lodge in the family for decades. And one night, once again, don't quote me on the year, but they were sitting around on the dock, and it was very clear. It was a very, very clear night, and I think there were 3 or 4 people sitting on the dock with Paul and his deceased wife, and they were just, watching the clarity of the sky, and they saw a UFO. They saw a craft or something that was definitely behaving in a way that no airplane would, or rather any other kind of vehicle would behave. So Paul did have his own UFO experience, and I think he describes them in one of his books. I think it's the very first book that comes to mind is Light at the End of the Tunnel, that was talked about earlier. I think he described it there. So yes, he did have a UFO experience, and that one alone, as far as I know.
We've got 2.5 minutes before we got to go to break at the top of the hour with our panel here tonight, paying tribute to the legendary Paul Hellyer, who passed away this past weekend at the age of 98. Bob McGuire, I want to bring you in here quickly as we got 2 minutes left. When you look at the legacy of Paul Hellyer, what do you see?
So, to me, he was kind of the first kind of really major politician in the North American continent that had credibility in terms of defense and kind of intelligence, that spoke up in favor of taking on the UFO issue. He was the first kind of major one who just really got out there and wouldn't let go of it. He was dogged. And like Victor says, and Sinead have said, when he got onto something, he stuck with it, and that was clear to me. I think that was his legacy, and it looks to me like probably Marco Rubio is going to be the one that kind of hangs on to it doggedly here in the United States, and I hope it has as much impact as Hellyer has had on others, thinking that, okay, here's somebody who's really serious, he's a credible person, has a long, long history, and he ain't letting go.
Steve Bassett, we got about a minute for you. I want to get your opinion on this before we turn it into hour 3.
His one of the things about Paul's track is that he lives alone. The older and older he got, the further and further in the past was his legacy, his gravitas, right? And that diminished his impact. I mean, if he had made statements like he made back when he was the Minister of Defense, I assure you there would have been some fur flying in both U.S. and Canada. But I think it's okay. He's an intellectual who put ideas that may yet come back into play. We're going through a anti-intellectual period, anti-science period, but it doesn't mean that. But his books will still be there, and he'll be reviewed by people as they try to plan the future and decide what they're going to do in governance. So he kind of, the last part of his life, there wasn't much of a place for Paul in that sense. We used to have Paul Hellyers in our Senate years ago, and they're kind of gone now. They're just not there. But we had men like that. Statesmen, they wrote important books and what have you. We don't have that now.
Steve, I'm going to get you to hold on right there because we are going to go to break here at the top of the hour. Stephen Bassett, Victor Vigiani, Dr. Bob McGuire, Grant Cameron, Sinead Wheelahan. We got it for another 30 minutes here on Spaced Out Radio as we pay tribute to the late Paul Hellyer. All right, we are clear for 6 minutes.
There you go. So now you can see why I recruited Sinead. Just sharp as a tack.
Brilliant. Brilliant. She's got fantastic hair, too. It's very rare I'm placing second, taking home a silver medal.
With a silver head of hair.
Be right back, guys. Come on, Doug.
There you go.
At least he has hair.
So what do you think is going to happen, Bob? Is there something exciting about to unravel here?
Look, Biden is not going to have the executive branch get in his way on infrastructure, the $3 trillion infrastructure add-on, and the Voting Rights Act. He will let nothing get in the way of that.
Yeah.
And they're in a rush, and people don't know why they're in a rush. And we're not going to talk politics on the air, but we'll talk about it in a second here. At the end of August, the census is put into effect, and that means states will be gerrymandering districts. And the Republicans are going to do everything they can to fix it so that they gain control of the House of Representatives. So nothing's getting in the way of politics right now.
Yeah. One thing that you need to keep in mind about politicians, including Manchin and others, one of the reasons they put up a fight, or at least they put up a lot of resistance early on, is so when they finally go ahead and vote for it later, it doesn't look like they just lined up behind the other group. And
that's absolutely true.
So Manchin is a smart guy. He is not going to be the one that stands between the American people and $4 billion and human infrastructure. Certainly not the regular bill.
That's going to pass. It's the voting rights stuff that is really going to be a big deal.
He's not going to stand. He's not going to stand in the way of the Voting Rights Act. And
except they're going to have to change the rules of the Senate to pass it.
Yeah.
Well, they already have. They've done away with the filibuster.
Oh, did they? Oh, I missed that.
Pretty much. I believe that's already kind of accepted. That's what they're going to do. And it's been part of the negotiations. So
that would be so huge.
Biden is going to become our FDR. Now, he's much older than FDR when he came into office. But FDR, of course, he's a little more vigorous than FDR because, well, FDR was in a wheelchair. But he will be our FDR if he gets these 3 bills passed.
Well, if they do away with the filibuster, we're going to have Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, the next 4 Democratic senators.
That is possible. It may be that the deal was struck that, okay, well, do away with the filibuster. We won't put up a fight, but don't go for statehood for either of those 2.
That may be a deal. That may be if we just get Voting Rights Act where they can't gerrymander districts, I'll be a happy camper.
However, if they do away the filibuster and the Democrats do maybe improve their position in the House and Senate in 2022, Puerto Rico and D.C. are coming in. Just start planning how to design the flag.
And it'll be majority rule for the first time in 20 years.
Yeah, look, all I can say is things can only get better. They can't possibly get worse.
Yeah, it's really bad now. I mean, really bad. Look. Let me be positive rather than negative. Let me be positive. 10 Republicans, including McConnell, voted for the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That is a major achievement.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, but, one of the reasons for that is that they can count.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So
85% of the American people were for it.
Yeah, but I'm talking about counting indictments. All these people are keeping track of the taxes. The tax cuts are going to Congress. There's indictments here. There's indictments there. There's all kinds. And McConnell's looking at it and going, okay, I think it's time for me to kind of get off the boat I've been on and move into another boat. He's not a stupid man. So all of this is connected. But right now, you're seeing the breakaway from the previous regime, and it's going to continue, and that's going to reflect in the Congress, which is not good. A lot of people are going to be unhappy about it, but we're going to get some things passed, and ultimately the politicians will win in that. We'll see how they fare in 2022, but I think McConnell has finally decided, okay, I've gone down that road far enough. Now we've got to get some things done, or my legacy is going to be just awful, just terrible. So, a moment of optimism, right? I don't know how we're going to pay for those bills, but hey, how do we pay for the wars? We don't pay for those either, right?
It's almost 0% interest rates. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, true.
We've got just
infrastructure. One of Paul Hellyer's big friends here was Mark Olson. And Mark Olson always told the conservatives here in Manitoba, he said, I don't know how it works, but he said, infrastructure will just basically pay for itself. I mean, you don't pay for it. I don't know how it works, but that's the whole deal with that money is that I remember Paul had a lot of conversations with Mark, and Mark's a big-time business guy here. And Mark said he could never convince the conservatives that you just simply put it in, and it's like free money, and it pays for itself. But we'll see where it goes. It's
all right, guys.
Well, $4 trillion for infrastructure, and everybody's going to be paying taxes because they're going to be working.
All right,
yeah,
we got 20 seconds, guys. We got 20 seconds, and we're going to be coming on back here, and we'll keep you guys till the bottom of the hour, and then say goodnight to all of you. So thank you so much for coming on this panel tonight. I really do appreciate you guys doing that. Here we go, everyone.
Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio is now underway. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We really do appreciate earning your listening ears wherever you are on this beautiful planet we call Earth. Thank you so much for tuning us in on our terrestrial affiliates around North America and digitally on TalkStream Live, Revolution Radio, and KPNL. All of our archives are free by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Just do me the favor, hit that subscribe button. The Desert Clam has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Eulogianus. Eulogianus is your password. Use it wisely, space travelers, as the Clam sets the password each and every night right here on Spaced Out Radio. Our website, spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram, Spaced Out Radio Show. We continue on tonight with a tribute to Paul Hellyer, the former Canadian Minister of Defense, passing away this past weekend at the age of 98. And what many of people may not know is he was a bright figure in the UFO world, which is why we have gathered this panel tonight of Grant Cameron, Victor Vigiani, Sinead Wheelahan, Steve Bassett, and Dr. Bob McGuire as we continue on tonight with it. And Steve, we were talking with you right before the break about the legacy of Paul Hellyer. What do you see that will be going into future of ufology here?
He's an intellectual player whose books will be read. He will be remembered for stepping forward when others would not. He has a lot of other legacy, by the way. Remember, I mean, he's got the Canadian political legacy. He has a legacy as a man of faith. He owned a newspaper, if I recall. He owned a lot of stock in a newspaper, influence in journalism. He has a huge legacy, not just ours. And now, if he could have lived a little longer and been on the stage when Disclosure came, I think that would have been very interesting. I'd like to have seen that. But it's a nice legacy, and I sometimes just want too much. Life is what it is, and you have to go with the flow. By the way, before I forget, Victor, we haven't mentioned Paul's wife. This woman has now been widowed twice. Do you know how she is doing and how much support she has around her?
Well, there's absolutely no doubt, Steve, that Sandra is. Every time I call the house, let's put it this way, Sandra is always the first one to answer the phone. And she's an extremely strong woman. And Paul always mentions the fact that just before he came forward in 2005, his first wife passed away. And he remarried, and Sandra became his wife. And when he decided to come forward in 2005 at the University of Toronto, I'm not sure if he used the word promised. I don't think that was the word, but he said that this was just going to be a one-off thing. He was just going to go to the University of Toronto. Give them, exactly. Give them their 40 minutes, and that would be it. And he said that to Sandra, and Sandra bought that. Unfortunately, Paul had other plans. It became, as you said, Steve, a legacy. But all through it, she stood by him through all of his speeches. I took him to several conferences because he wasn't one to drive a whole lot. So myself and another good friend, Chris Rushak, would drive him to different conferences throughout the province here in Ontario. We went on the Modern Knowledge Tour, one that you were on, Steve. And she stood by him all along all of that. And whenever any issues came up, it was just something that she just more or less accepted, along with what Grant mentioned regarding the banking issues, the economic issues that Paul was involved in. She stood by him. Now, from all of the communications that I've had with Paul's niece, Wanda, she sent several communications to all of us as to what happened after Paul hurt himself. It was very clear that Paul has a very, very tightly knit family who are constantly around him during this very, very difficult time. And Sandra has done well through it all because she's had the support of this family, and she will be okay. She's a very, very intelligent individual, very strong, very bold, and so much like Paul in a lot of ways. So she helped guide him through all of this, and I know she has the support of her family, and so she's going to be doing well. After all, I know there's a whole grieving process that will have to happen, but Sandra will make out quite well with respect to what happens next, and she has to make some key decisions as to how she handles, I guess, his estate and perhaps all the files that he's had sort of sequestered throughout the years. So yeah, she'll be okay. She'll be okay.
Are you going to go to the funeral? Yeah, or is it taking place already?
Well, no, I haven't. We haven't heard back yet. Wanted to send out the email this morning with a little caveat at the very end that the funeral plans would be announced soon. So that, typically within the Christian rite, anyways, it usually happens, within 3 days. But I haven't heard yet when the funeral will be happening.
Will he be lying in state?
No,
I don't think so. No.
That's a question for Victor. Victor, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
One of the things I think when you're talking legacy with Paul Hellyer that I think people misunderstand, he had not been in politics for many, many years. I mean, his big days were way back he'd been retired for a number of years.
Yeah,
and as Steve had said, if he had said this stuff he said now in 67, it would have been a different story. But most people in Canada wouldn't even know who Paul Hellyer was. I know we were looking tonight on CBC News to see whether there was an announcement because they have that political show that's about dinner time. and there was no mention of it. We were wanting to see if he had been mentioned, but it's been many years since Paul had tried to start his own party, so he wasn't for a lot. Even after he was in the Liberal Party, but then he went and started his own party, which sort of outed him as an outsider, and that was many years. So I think a lot of Canadians would not know. The old timers like you and I would know who Paul Hellyer was.
Exactly. Yeah, it's an interesting point that you and Steve raised, because what really puzzled me, and I'll be waiting very, very circumspectly about this, because Paul was such an important person in Canadian politics in the past. Being a deputy prime minister and minister of defense. Generally speaking, when someone of notoriety passes away, the Canadian government makes some sort of statement about it. It's just protocol. But so far, there has been no word about that from any of the Department of Defense or from Ottawa or from the Prime Minister at all, because he did serve under Pierre Trudeau, and also his son now is the Prime Minister. So there should be some sort of acknowledgement, at least at a minimal level, of the passing of a former Minister of Defense. It may not include any reference to his UFO activity. It may not. And but still, the Canadian government has to recognize a man of this stature. And that's one of the reasons why I sent out emails today to every single...
Raising Cane's is celebrating 25 years. That means 25 years of serving over 2.5 billion cooked-to-order chicken finger meals. And 25 years of saying drive-through rhymes. Lots and lots of times. Oh, and 25 years of the same mascot. Okay, different mascots with the same name. And 25 years of serving our communities. Thanks for making us your chicken fix since way back in '96. Raising Cane's, 25 years, one love.
Got an occasion that's worth celebrating? Well, nothing says celebration like flowers from ProFlowers. Surprise your special someone with brilliant bouquets starting at just $19.99 plus shipping and handling. Yes, top quality, fresh from the farm blooms that are perfect for any and all occasions are only $19.99 for a limited time at ProFlowers.com. Don't wait till the last minute to send that anniversary or birthday surprise. Shop ProFlowers.com and make their day with a bright bouquet. See website for details.
Media outlet here in Canada, the CBC, CTV, Global, the Toronto Star, the Globe and Mail, all of the major media outlets. I sent a press release to them, and I know the people did receive it and will kind of read it. Whether they react to it or not is another question. If they don't, I'm going to be seriously getting on the backs of some of these people, these journalists, who have to come forward and at least acknowledge this man's contribution to the Canadian society.
Very, very true. Quick question here from Joe. Do any of you know whether or not Paul's 3 children will carry on the UFO legacy?
I can comment on that. I don't know for sure, but I don't know if any of them have really taken on this issue with the seriousness that Paul will. And if they did, they would have to have the same sort of passion that Paul had. And from my understanding, none of his children have that passion. That's just my sort of observation. He had never spoken about it. He'd never spoken about, once I leave the planet, that my children may, one of my children may carry this on. I never heard that from Paul. So I would doubt very seriously if that would happen. But then again, the Hellyers are a unique family, so someone just may take up the gauntlet, and let's hope they do.
Michael Huntington, who's been a guest on this show, and hi, Michael, good to see you. He is asking, do you think the Canadian military will check out his papers in order to see what is cleared for security reasons?
I don't know. Grant, what would you think about that one?
Well, his papers, that's what I said back in the 70s when he had retired, and his papers, he was going to whatever that place is, an underground place in Ottawa where they keep all the papers. He was talking about it. So those papers have been there for quite a while. That's what I'm saying. People got to realize he was Minister of Defense like 50 years ago. I mean, it was an awful long time ago where So I don't think there's. I always have the doubt that he became very interested in the last 15 or 20 years, but before then, I'm sure he doesn't have any Roswell material or anything like that. But
well, I can add something to that now that you mention it, Grant, because in the Library and Archives Canada, which is sort of like similar to, I guess, the U.S. Library of Congress, the Library and Archives Canada catalogs everything about everything that happens in Canada. It's just a huge compendium of everything. And if you go to Library and Archives Canada and you search out UFOs, you have several departments, the Canadian Department of Transport, the RCMP, the National Council on something, and also the RCMP that I did mention. In any case, if you go there are 9,500 UFO files. And those UFO files I quote-unquote discovered back in 2010. I mean, they were there years before I discovered them, but no one ever talked about them. So I made them known. And so I began to read through these files, and that's 9,000 files. Basically, they're just UFO reports by, Uncle Fred and Aunt Martha sitting on the terrace watching for UFOs and seeing something and reporting it. But there also were included several documents by security commissions and security committees about UFO things that happen with respect to memos back and forth. But there are also memorandum from one Paul Hellyer, letters to people who wrote to the Department of Defense at the time asking Mr. Hellyer about UFOs. And at the time, Paul would either write them himself or have someone pen them. And he admitted at the time that he had no interest in them, that he had no evidence that these things were true. And those letters are all available online for people to read. So it kind of indicates that at a political level, anyways, Paul did not give UFOs any kind of credence at all. So that's an interesting perspective about how he perceived the issue back then. And that's at a political level. On a personal level, what he knew then is anybody's guess.
There may be a chance that he puts the files, say, at the University of Toronto or York or something like that, because I know that Salant's files are there. I'm going to be in Toronto in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to go look at those files. So if you can maybe help the family, that you can do those. So put them in archives of the university where I can get Sinead to go and work, 48 hours a week and find everything there.
Yeah, well,
Grant is always giving me homework. Sorry, guys, always. I have to get a Gold Star sticker once a week, or I don't get my lunch money. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's good that you mentioned that, both of you, because once the dust settles and the grieving process comes to some sort of closure, if you want to call it that, I'm not sure how I'll handle it, but I think I'm going to have to approach the family or at least speak with Sandra or Paul's niece Wanda and broach the question. Okay, Paul has had this legacy. He's got a lot because of files in his computer that are there, both paper and digitally. And what's going to happen? What's the plan for that? Or do you have a plan for that? And if you don't have a plan, I can help you with it. And there are other people who can help you, either dispose or do something with those files that will be in an archived manner so that everyone will have access to them. Or at least we can place them someplace, as you mentioned, Grant, so that people will have access to them.
I think the university would love those files, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to get Go ahead, Victor. Sorry, finish.
No, we'll just see what happens. That's all I'm going to say, really.
I want to get your opinion, panel, on one more thing here. And this is something that I asked Paul back in my last email with him. I asked him some pretty blatant questions that he answered. And I'm pretty happy that he did. But this is in regards to Canada's role in ufology. He believed, as he told me, my question was, as far as you know, are there any hidden groups or agenda within the Canadian government whether it's CSIS or something more secret, that are keeping tabs on Canada's role in the UFO department. And this is what he answered. He goes, I am told that there is a group that occupies one floor of the National Research Council building. A former Mountie confirmed in writing that the RCMP were involved and inadvertently told him that Canada had been in touch with 2 alien species on the assumption that he was in the loop, but they went mum as soon as they realized that he wasn't. Has anybody ever heard of whether or not, or confirmed that Canada does have a secret group working on the UFO files?
I can make a quick comment on that's what I mentioned at the very beginning. This 1954, he had said that the source that was the top expert in the Defense Department that was advising him when he gave that 67 speech was a guy who was with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And that's where I said I couldn't believe that he couldn't remember this guy's name. So that makes sense. And the contact the alien would have been Alpha and Tyla, would have been the 2 aliens that the Canadians were in contact with in the 1950s. Wilbur Smith had radio contact, and this was all went right up, according to Wilbur Smith, went right up to the Prime Minister of Canada.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And for
Dave, would you mind if I put a question to the group? Actually, would that be all right?
Go right ahead.
Whenever you're ready. Okay. I just wanted to ask everyone, so, we were talking earlier about Mr. Hellyer's feelings about the banking system, and also that he was trying to encourage government to move away from dependency on oil as a form of economy. And, we know that, or I know, Victor knows, Grant knows, I'm assuming this was an open thing, that he believed that there were 2 secret bases in Nevada and Arizona where ET technology had been utilized in terms of reverse engineering, and it was going to be turned into something else, that those 2, that the U.S. government already had its hands on free energy, and that was, currently in existence. I don't know when he said this, but he said it with confidence, and very firmly believed that there was a shadow government that was, watching over this process, and that it was happening at these 2 specific locations. So I see a connection between the oil industry, and of course, there's a connection between the oil industry and the banking system, right? They are like this. Mm-hmm. So then here we have this free energy topic, which Mr. Hellyer was openly speaking about, writing about, and using as an example of why our systems need to be changed, right? And why they're not benefiting us. That there are things that are being kept from us that don't need to be kept from us, that this is unfair. And his focus was free energy. So that ties into so many things that were a big priority for him. And I'm curious what everyone here knows about Mr. Hellyer's understanding, not his understanding of free energy. He was an engineer, he was a pilot, but what did he say about it that you know of, and what would he want to have seen happen with that? Does anybody know more about that topic?
Well, I sort of, he wrote about it, I believe it was in Light at the End of the Tunnel, or the next book. I know that he and I spoke often, and even during some of the interviews that I conducted with Paul on the Richard Serrett show, he and I interviewed Paul at least twice, and I know one time we actually did a pre-recording at the studios where Richard Serrett does his program. And Paul was intensely committed to and convinced, and even I don't know, perplexed by the whole idea of the free energy concept, or the 0-point energy. And he realized that this form of energy, this anti-gravitic technology, or whatever it happened to be, and he did have a degree in aeronautical engineering. He had a sense of what the quantum physics behind it all really meant. Now, he was not a physicist by any measure, but he did resolve in his own mind the connection between these technologies and the end of fossil fuels and the end of sort of the economic system as it stands right now. He saw those 3 things as 3 pillars of this whole issue, in addition to contact with extraterrestrials. That was sort of like the other pillar. But the pillar of economics, the pillar of oil, and the pillar of the technologies was something that he wove together in his narratives about what the whole ET issue is all about. And that's one of the things that Paul did in a very unique way in just about every one of his speeches. He wove all those elements together to allow people to understand that the UFO issue did not stand on its own, that it was deeply entwined within economics, within the banking system, and that any cascade failure that would happen after the 0 point energy and extraterrestrial contact would occur would be the end of the banking system as we know it, and the end of the fossil fuel industry as we know it. So he had a great way of intertwining all those issues, and he understood the technology very, very well for a relative layman within the area of physics.
We're already breaking away from the U.S. petrodollar running the economies. I mean, China is setting up its own independent currency, and others will follow. Cryptocurrencies are coming. The upheaval is already here, and I think it'll be more helpful if all of this renewable energy, et cetera, that's going on eases us into the 0 point energy, and I think that may be some of the motivation for wanting to release some of this 0 point energy stuff because they know it's coming anyway.
Yeah. What I don't really understand, and I really didn't talk a lot to Paul about this, is why and how did he have this insight? Is this just something that occurred to him, or was it something that was, did he receive a download of some kind that these realizations were coming to him in some way? And
Victor, I'm going to tell you, I don't know his mind, but I am a scientist and I do know some physics. So when you see these things flying around and you see they don't have an obvious means of propulsion, they have to have an energy source, and that implies something like 0 point energy.
And on that note, I got to cut you all off. Victor Vigiani, sorry for your loss of your good friend.
Thank you.
Paul Hellyer, Grant Cameron, Sinead Wheelahan, Stephen Bassett from the Paradigm Research Group, and Science Bob McGuire. A great panel paying tribute to the legendary Paul Hellyer, what he brought to ufology. Coming up next, we have John Hudson with the Unbiased UFO Report, the Newswire, and the Thought of the Day. Stay tuned. Spaced Out Radio continues after this. Thank you, guys.
Oh, that was fun.
Give you guys.
That's nice. Thank you.
That was good. Nice. Excellent. Yep. Excellent.
Sorry, Victor. Sorry for your loss, Victor.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, we lost a good friend. Yeah.
Well, Steve, it's good to see you again.
Yes, indeed. Look, Victor, I hope you're able to go to the funeral. I really do. I hope you.
Yeah. I hope the family has it in a way, despite some of the restrictions here in the province with respect to this COVID situation. There are restrictions for funerals, but we'll see what transpires.
Thank you.
All right.
And on behalf of our audience, guys, I appreciate all of you coming together on short notice for this. I think that once again, all of you being here really sums up the man that Paul Hellyer was for the field of ufology, and it's quite incredible to gather all of you together. Thank you so much on behalf of all of our listeners.
And good night.
Bob, we'll talk to you guys in the morning. Sinead, I sent you a message, if you don't mind.
Sure. Right now?
Yeah, it's on Facebook. On your
Alrighty,
Facebook message.
I will check. Thank you so much, Victor.
Sinead, are you in Toronto?
Yes, I am.
Whereabouts do you live?
We have met, my friend. We have met 2 or 3 times, but I look totally different with glasses on. I'm in Midtown.
Okay.
So the Davisville area. Where are you again? You're Danforth?
No, I'm out in Port Credit in Mississauga.
Oh, okay. I thought you were in Toronto proper. Okay. Well, we should get together, Victor. We have
darn sure. Yeah, for sure.
Lots of
and my heart really goes out to you. Honestly, Paul was just incredible. So my heart goes out to you.
Okay, we'll stay in touch.
All right, Victor. Much love. Take care.
Thank you, Dave, so much. Your hair is better than mine. I do not accept the biggest compliment.
You kicked my ass on the hair thing tonight.
You guys,
I don't know. Hair wars.
All right, Sinead, if you can get back to me, I sent you a date for
I will do.
Bringing you in, okay?
Victor.
All right, guys. Take care.
Bye. Thanks again, Dave.
See you
later.
Guys. All right, let's bring in John Hudson here for the Unbiased UFO Report as we get ready here. Well, that was a power show.
Yeah, that was good stuff. That was really good stuff.
Hey, sometimes we can bring it all together very quickly.
Yeah, but what was really nice was it was some incredibly beautiful things were said about Paul, and it was a really nice thing for him. But there was a lot of really good dialogue on all the topics around what he was interested in. So that was really cool. I think he would have really liked the show.
I think so. Felt kind of weird about that today. I really did. Mr. Duff, how are you?
The other thing I find kind of funny is that, as I've said before, I think what a lot of people get from researching all this is a different perspective on death. But I still don't see that necessarily reflected when we actually lose somebody, which I think is kind of interesting. I think it shows that most people aren't really internalizing it.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. And 1 second here. Sorry, I'm just messaging Sinead because I want to get her on my calendar for...
Man, what she said about Paul, that was... I don't know if you saw, I posted on the forum, she should speak at the memorial. Like, that was beautiful. That was so well said.
Yeah.
And so eloquent. I was really impressed.
Yeah, she did well. All of them did well. All of them.
No, I agree.
Great panel tonight. Hi, Wizard Gren. How are you? And if anybody sees anything floating around tonight, it's not UFOs. It's just Fap's head. He's doing a tour.
That'd take a lot of helium.
Well, all Fap has to do is stand on the top of Colorado, and the entire country can see him. And I'm Chad Smith. Thank you. All right, we got...
Where did that come from?
Oh, yes, good idea. So, one day in the UFO Garage chat room, Chad was in there, and sometimes I go in chat rooms, I kind of lurk, and all of a sudden I'll just start, like, and I just said, I'm Chad Smith. Right? And then I said, I think Bim Jim was in there too, and I said, I'm Bim Jim, and there was a couple others. I said that, and that's how it started. So Chad came...
No, but what I love about it is it's just like when you have a group of friends and something funny happens somewhere, and it ends up creating this little inside joke that just continues on for a couple of days or a couple of weeks.
Hold on, buddy. We rounded third. We're heading for home tonight on Spaced Out Radio. My name is Dave Scott. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We really do appreciate earning your listening ears wherever you are on this planet we call Earth. And I want to say that I'm going to remind you that if you've missed most of this show or others, check out our free archives by going to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do old Davey the favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you, including rocking out to Bumblefoot and reading up on Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire. Follow us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on Instagram at Spaced Out Radio Show. Hey, let's get right to it. The unbiased UFO report. This is where we bring in our intrepid UFO reporter, John Hudson, to come on in and discuss everything UFOs with us on this beautiful night. And John, we always appreciate when you get the time to come join us, so thank you so much for being here once again.
Happy to do so. Happy to do so.
All right, let's start things off. Fiscal year 20...
Raising Cane's is celebrating 25 years. That means 25 years of serving over 2.5 billion cooked-to-order chicken finger meals and 25 years of saying drive-through rhymes. lots and lots of times. Oh, and 25 years of the same mascot. Okay, different mascots with the same name. And 25 years of serving our communities. Thanks for making us your chicken fix since way back in '96. Raising Cane's, 25 years, one love.
Unexpected trouble? CashNet USA can take the stress out of borrowing emergency funds. Our fast, secure application process makes it easy to apply online 24/7. Plus, CashNet USA offers same-day funding if approved before 10:30 a.m. Central Time, Monday through Friday. Additional terms may apply. Visit cashnetusa.com or tap the banner to apply today.
22, what's happening with the UAP task force?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a couple of things in this that different people are interpreting different ways, but all in all, my personal opinion is it's a good thing. Basically, Danny Silva did a nice report on this, so I encourage everyone to check it out. I'll provide a link to it later. But essentially, there's a couple things in it that I think everyone should key in on. One I thought was just interesting was that all the data being asked for should be provided not only to the UAP task force, but also to the National Air and Space Intelligence Center. And in my opinion, when you have an internal office that's also a recipient of that data, it's weird, but often in a bureaucracy that puts a little more weight on the document creation, and sometimes has a positive impact on quality. While we'd heard this before, it was nice to see it in writing that it is expected that this will be a quarterly report. So we're supposed to get something every 90 days, let me restate that. Congress will get something every 90 days. And, the one thing that was really, really good was that there was a specific mention about the fact that all reported unidentified aerial phenomenal data related events that occurred during a time period other than the previous 90 days, but were not included in an earlier report, must also be included in that report. And that's stipulated for every report. And so when you combine the fact that they're making it very clear that every agency has an opening to supply and an expectation to supply the data, and you add the fact that they're saying that if you miss anything in one report, you don't get out of it. You have to include it in the following report once you realize you've missed it. This is really starting to kind of tie up all the loose ends that a lot of people will try to use as wiggle space to get out of doing things. And so this is really kind of putting the screws on people in a way. And so, personally, I think that's a really good thing. I'm very optimistic about it.
Now, are we hearing what kind of money they're going to be putting into this program?
No, there's no word of that yet, at least not what I found. And, to be very honest with you, I rarely think that the money that we even hear gets applied is actually accurate, because every department has all sorts of funny ways of moving around their internal funny money. But it'd be a good data point to find out. And as soon as I have it, I'll let you know.
All right. I think that's important because, with the UAPTF, we still don't know how serious we're going to be able to take this group. I guess with them getting more budgeting money for the next quarter or the next fiscal year, this really shows that there might be something to a continuance of UAP studies within the American government.
I wholeheartly agree, and keep in mind too that they only need a really large budget if they're going to endeavor into a lot of after discovery research. If the point of that office is to collect and process records from other offices, their budget really doesn't have to be so huge for them to be effective. The bigger deal is what Bob reported in the previous panel, and that is that he's heard that the top person in the office is now going to be cleared up to the SAP level. And that to me, that's a much bigger deal than any budget number.
Yeah, Bob's saying in the chat room, it will be a part of the authorized budget answer to the NDAA.
It's awesome.
Which we'll see what happens from there. All right, let's move on to section number 2 tonight. Dr. David Clark's report on Calvine UFO. What happened here?
So this is fun. This is, I mean, keep in mind that a lot of this is just hypothesis at this point, but it's kind of a neat way that things are tying in because, if you remember before, what we talked about what Danny Sheehan had reported about this Mach 12 plane that had, 120 nukes.
Yes.
And, there were some weird details in Danny's reporting, specifically about how it reached that speed. And 120 nukes is kind of it's a big number, and it's kind of an odd thing to just kind of pop out of nowhere. And I've also been kind of wondering, like, how could Danny get briefed on anything? I mean, anything Danny would be briefed on isn't really that secure, and so it'd have to be something fairly old. So then, basically, David Clark comes out with this report he's been working on what is seemingly a totally different issue, and that is him showing possible evidence that the Calvine UFO was actually not really a UFO, that it was quite possibly a black U.S. program. That is commonly known as Aurora. And it turns out that the document that showed up a couple months ago that I think really kind of nailed this down pretty well, it turns out that it was actually David that got it released. So he's really been the forward push behind all this. But what was super interesting about David's report is that in it he included a picture that was done by a defense magazine in 1990. Of a theoretical example of what Aurora might look like. And in that drawing, they oddly included 121, so not 120, but 121 ports to release nuclear weapons from. And they even included, and I'll post all this later, they even included a cool little drawing of the very simple spring-based release system that would be used for each little warhead. And so the fact that this defense magazine said 121 back in 1990, you have David Sheehan being told what he was told, which could be a ship that's that old, because we're talking about something from the late 80s. And now I think we almost have a possible situation here where not only is David showing that the Calvine UFO might have been this Aurora, or at least a U.S. black program, but we might even have a tie-in to say that it's also the same vehicle that Danny Sheehan was briefed on. And so once again, this is all hypothesis at this point, although I have to say I think David puts down a pretty good set of evidence to show that Calvine was not a UFO. But the last quick point I want to make is that the whole reason why people didn't hear about Aurora in Britain was because of something that was applied called a D notice, which is basically saying, hey, this is a U.S. defense project, don't talk about it. Well, this poster was the one that Nick Pope had on his wall that mysteriously disappeared. The fact that no one told him why it was removed, the fact that he didn't know that it wasn't a UFO, also in a weird way shows that Mr. Pope was not as far up the totem pole as someone would like to believe, because he obviously didn't have enough clearance to know that picture he had up in his office that he claimed was a good evidence of a UFO was actually Aurora.
That is very interesting. And, there's been a lot of speculation by many people in the UFO community over the years on how deep Nick Pope actually went inside the Ministry of Defense with the United Kingdom when he worked allegedly on the UFO program. Now, I have been on record, I have no problem saying this, we've never interviewed Nick Pope on this show, and we have tried to get him. But on the flip side, I think a lot of what he says as a so-called expert in this field, and I'm paraphrasing here myself, is very much nonchalant in his words, because the information that he has is already what's been repeated by everybody else. He hasn't really given us anything new in a long, long time. That doesn't take away from his intelligence or anything like that. But I mean, when you're an insider, you got to bring some, juice to the table. People are thirsty. Yes. We need that juice, and
yes.
And we're not getting it. We're not getting it.
And the last, sorry, I was going to say the last point that I think is also nice about this is that we all always assume that all these sightings are UFOs, and we all know in the back of our heads that some of them aren't going to be. Some of them are going to be U.S. programs. And I think it's kind of nice that we have discovered one that was fairly popular and fairly well known that a lot of people hung their hat on, that now really looks like it was Aurora. And so now we have a good example of a case where it wasn't a UFO. And, the world's not going to end. It'll be okay. And life goes on. But there were definitely some interesting things learned from David's reporting.
Well, one of the things I want to post to our audience here, if you want to learn more about the Aurora, really check out the work of Michael Schratt. He's an aviation historian. You can find a lot of his talks on YouTube, his entire full presentations. And he gets into the Aurora and other secret programs and other secret aircraft that are out there flying around or potentially flying around, from the TR-3Bs to the replacements of the SR-71, which we could be up to the SR-75 right now. We just don't know because it's not being released. But anybody who has an interest in aviation and wants to learn about the black projects, I really suggest go on YouTube, type in Michael Schratt, that's Schratt, and you will be blown away by his presentations and his literature and work that he does to dig out this information. And the information, he'll even tell you, the information that he has is all public knowledge. Everything that has been placed in the public, from military magazines to popular mechanics to what's accidentally been released in budgets by the government, and that's how the name Aurora came out.
He's a snoop. I mean, he stitches together data from all over the place, and on top of that, he gives a great presentation. He's a lot of fun to listen to. So I could not agree more.
I agree with Michael Huntington's comment here in the chat room. Learn your X-plane history, people of ufology. That is a very, very astute comment there. Very astute comment. So I fully agree with that. Finally tonight, because we only have you for about another 2 minutes here, we are getting into J.J. Abrams' first episodes of his new UFO documentary.
Have you watched any of it yet?
I have not yet. I'm planning it this weekend.
Okay, all right. So I only started watching the first episode. I only got about 10 minutes into it. And I'll tell you, the reason why I stopped watching it is the same reason why everyone's talking about it. And that was that he shows a bunch of stuff, pictures, videos, audio, and there's absolutely no way to know what the validity of what he's posting. Some of the stuff he shows is stuff that some people feel has been already debunked. Other people disagree. Some of the stuff he shows no one's seen before, and we don't have any kind of trail of authority. So, chain of authority, we have no idea where it came from. And so for me, and I'm taking it from the comments I'm seeing on Twitter and the fact that, some shows were all about this today, are taking away from our enjoyment of the show, because we're all sitting there wondering, like, well, wait a second, I've never heard that audio before. Where'd that come from? And so it's unfortunately putting some interesting pressure on the film, because we don't know how to process the images that are being shown.
Very true, very true. But you know what? At least we're getting something. There's new material,
and it looks pretty.
And of course, J.J. Abrams will make sure that it is pretty for the camera. John, we will talk to you very, very soon. Thank you for another great edition of the UFO Report. Let's get to Captain Shirk's SOR Newswire.
You have a good night.
The news is always changing, which is why we bring you the SOR Newswire at the back end of every show, where we get to the weird, the strange, the wacky, and sometimes the ufological. Well, now that the military has admitted that they are checking out UFOs, it isn't as strange when everyday people claim that they have encountered aliens. However, this one Arizona woman on TikTok, which we told you about last week, is still debating her video. Is it a satellite? Is it the top of some sort of metal canister? Allie Murray still believes it may be aliens, but she's put out a part 2 of the video People had guessed what the item was, whether it was the top of a water tower or two satellite dishes put together. In a third video now, Allie goes on to ask if anyone can figure out what a mysterious hole on one side of the object could be, and points a stick to it. Well, TikTok goes running a-blazing because this has been seen forever. One commentator wrote, "Did y'all not see the eyeball in the water open and close?" Someone responded, "If that is, I seen that. It was open for a while, and after she pointed the stick at it, whatever it was," another person wrote, "it blinked." Yeah, well, we're all going to have to check out the video. You only have to go on TikTok and check it on out for Allie Murray's video. It's very popular right now. Fancy a good conspiracy theory? Of course we do. This is what we do on a nightly basis, right? Well, apparently aliens are hiding in secret underwater bases. Brian Daniel is no stranger to the odd bonkers theory, and in one of his latest videos, he has explained why he believes there is a major government conspiracy afoot. In another TikTok account, why is everybody going to TikTok now? Anyways, he says that he witnessed an actual real-life alien being dealt with by government officials after it washed up on a beach, and it got him to think about what secrets the seas may hold to our understanding of extraterrestrial life. I decided to investigate the origin of the alien, and I stumbled across what looks like an underwater alien base, he tells his followers, showing the images of the supposed base. Daniel, who has previously spoken out about allegedly being followed by U.S. Secret Service agents. Of course they're following you, Daniel. You got helicopters, men in black cars following you around, because nobody in this world drives a blacked-out SUV other than the men in black. Anyways, that's sarcasm. Notice the circular, deep underwater structure in his videos. When viewed from land, yeah, you can see what looks to be like a UFO base. I'm looking at the pictures right now. I see nothing. Daniel, time to pack it in. That's bad evidence. We know they're underwater. I don't think you caught anything. And you know what? You know how I say I'm not even putting my toes in the water when it comes to, sharks? They all want to eat you. Case in point. A Florida surfer was bitten by a shark in just knee-deep water over the weekend. The incident happened on Saturday at New Smyrna Beach. Officials say that a 35-year-old man was getting off his surfboard when the shark bit him right in the foot and ankle, causing minor lacerations. The individual reported the shark to be around 2 to 3 feet in length. Not a big one, but enough to do damage and say, hey, this tastes good. He was treated by medical staff at the scene and left the beach on his own. But you know that if the babies are there, Mama is right around the corner. Definitely. A young adult bear was tranquilized and relocated after it wandered into a Los Angeles supermarket that was full of shoppers. The LAPD said officers responded about 6:45 in the morning Saturday to Ralph's Supermarket in the Porter Ranch neighborhood, where shoppers initially reported multiple bears inside the store. Officers arrived to find only one bear inside the business. It was unclear if there had been others or if the initial reports had been mistaken. David Balin of the Porter Ranch Neighborhood Council says that he posted on Facebook, after fleeing the scene, the bear was missing in action until found hiding under a trailer on the northeast corner of Walmart. Yeah, darn bears, they're trying to get away from the police too. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service tranquilized the bear. It was decided that the best route for not only public safety, but also for the bear itself, was to chemically immobilize the animal, which we were successful in doing, said Lieutenant Jake Coombs, an officer with the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife, and it's on its way back to the Angeles National Forest for release to suitable habitats. It's good when they don't kill it. I don't like the killing of the bears. We got a bear running around right now in our neighborhood. He's about a mile away right now. You know what I would say? Come on over. Let's have a chat. Bring some honey. I like honey. Wildlife trappers were summoned to an airport in India where workers found themselves in a kind of a situation of life-intimidating art. A snake on a plane Kolkata airport officials confirmed a baggage handler for the airline, Indigo, was preparing the flight for a flight to Mumbai when he spotted the snake in the cargo hold before the passengers began boarding. A Kolkata Forest Department officer was summoned to the scene, and a video was recorded at the airport shows the trapper struggling to contain the large reptile on the tarmac. The scene evoked comparisons to the 2006 action comedy film Snakes on a Plane. The snake was later identified as a non-venomous rat snake. And finally tonight, basketball players from New York and Canada gathered in a New York gym in the midst of a Guinness World Record attempt for the longest basketball game. The teams, consisting of high school and college students from across western New York and nearby schools across the border in Canada, began the attempt Friday at Nardin Academy in Buffalo. Nick Rivelis, the organizer of the attempt, said he and some friends started playing an annual basketball game to raise money for mental health issues after a close friend died as a result of suicide. 6 years ago, I started running a neighborhood basketball team, and now it's grown. So far, the game continues. Thank you to Captain Shirk for the thought of the day, John Hudson for the unbiased UFO report, and our impressive panel paying respects to Paul Hellyer. We got Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal rocking in the background with Little Brother is Watching. Bumblefoot is the official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. Get your horns up for the guitar god himself. Special thanks to everybody listening in at home, at work, in your cars, wherever you may be. Thank you to everyone in our chat rooms tonight on YouTube, LGAP, Twitch, Revolution Radio, Spreaker, Facebook, and on Twitter at hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Remember, this show is copyright by Spaced Out Radio and SOR Media Ventures Limited. Thank you so much for choosing to share your evening with us, because together, my friends, we're watching. We own the night. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Yes, the Woo train has docked for the night. But soon, my friends, we shall ride again. Your seats are always available. Your tickets never expire. And if you want to bring a friend, name him Chad Smith, and they can come too. Good night.
As one of the South's largest mortgage lenders, a home loan from Trustmark fits you to a T. Trustmark. People you trust. Advice that works. Member FDIC. Equal housing lender.
Raising Cane's is celebrating 25 years. That means 25 years of serving over 2.5 billion cooked-to-order chicken finger meals. And 25 years of saying drive-thru rhymes. Lots and lots of times. Oh, and 25 years of the same mascot. Okay, different mascots with the same name. And 25 years of serving our communities. Thanks for making us your chicken fix since way back in '96. Raising Cane's, 25 years, one love.